Meeting on elections will come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Shaheen.
Here.
Vice Chair Busey.
Here.
Rep. Isaac. Rep. Morales-Shaw. Rep. Plesa. Rep. Raymond. Rep. Swanson. Rep. Toth. Rep. Terry Wilson.
Members, there is not a quorum present at this time, but if there's no objection, I would like to go ahead and take the testimony from people who have registered and are here. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the chair will begin hearing and testimony as normal. As a reminder, anyone present wishing to testify before the committee, please register at the kiosk located in the hallways behind the hearing room. If you require assistance in registering or testifying, please contact committee staff. Due to the number of witnesses and to make sure we accommodate all who wish to testify, there will be a limit of 2 minutes per witness during public testimony. Members, please remember to check out the publicly available comments. These comments are left by the public on each agenda item in our hearings. Comments are open until the end of our hearing and are posted upon adjournment. The hearing will consist of both public and invited testimonies. Please note that for each agenda item addressed today, we will start with invited testimony first. Also note that because this is an interim hearing and no legislative action is being taken on a measure, all testimony will be registered as neutral. And let the chair recognize Ms. Swanson. Good to see you. Okay, so first on our agenda is charge 6, integration of early and election day voting. Monitor the implementation of SB 2753 relating to the integration of early voting by personal appearance and election day voting, including the manner in which election returns are processed and other related changes. Monitor the working group led by the Texas Secretary of State in conjunction with counties. Monitor the statutorily required Secretary of State report and its recommendations for proper implementation. Identify any administrative, funding, or operational issues that may warrant legislative consideration. With that, the chair calls Ms. Christina Atkins, because we didn't hear enough from you yesterday.
Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. We show you registered as Ms. Christina Atkins, and you are with the Texas Secretary of State's office, and you will be testifying on the topic. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Well, thanks for being here and coming back.
It's my
You
pleasure.
may proceed.
All right. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, members. Thank you for inviting us back again today to discuss some very important topics in the election world. Looking at the charge that we're evaluating today, it relates to Senate Bill 2753, which came out of our last regular session in 2025. Senate Bill 2753 modifies the election process at its most basic level by eliminating the gap between early voting and election day and creating one continuous voting period. That is the primary purpose of that bill. There are other election-related changes that this bill brings about, and I'm going to briefly go over some of those larger topics before I tell you a little bit about what our office has done to facilitate implementation of this legislation. In addition to eliminating that gap between election day, thereby creating a continuous period, it shifts the start day of the first day of early voting. So it's the same number of days, it just moves those days so that they're all together without that four-day gap in between. Early voting has to be conducted at the main location and at all branch locations for each day of that early voting period now, that continuous voting period, including Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. The bill also requires that election results must now be reported by precinct and separately reported by polling location. However, results by polling location are not going to be broken down by precinct within each grouping, but we do have two different ways of reporting results now. Early voting results and election day results will no longer be reported separately. Both early voting and election day will be reported now as in-person voting, and we'll have a separate category for mail ballot voting. Any location that is designated as an early voting location will also now have to be used as an election day location. However, the bill does provide for the greater ability to combine your polling locations by changing the rules on how we combine our precincts that are used for Election Day voting. That language actually mimics another bill that was passed during the same session, so that part of the bill has already been enacted, and counties already have the ability to start reducing down their locations if necessary to avoid unreasonable expenditures in cost or resources because of having very, very small, tiny voting locations. When a location is used for both early voting and Election Day, the entity can now use the same voting system equipment from early voting to Election Day. Under our previous law, they would have had to change out the equipment between those two periods, but as all ballots are going to be counted together, there is no need to change out that equipment, so it eliminates that need to transition that equipment. When a location is used for both early voting and Election Day, there is a requirement for two locks for ballot boxes, and there's only a one lock requirement for Election Day. And so, while the bill doesn't exactly address this, there are a number of solutions to this particular issue where individuals are going to have to figure out how to get that second ballot box key out to early voting locations so that they're able to conduct Election Day voting and meet some of those requirements. So at its essence, what we're seeing is a combined voting period, more consistent days and times for early voting and Election Day, because the bill also requires a similar hour count for all counties across the state. It requires that election results be reported in different categories now. We're reporting them in person and by mail. We're not reporting early voting results separately. And it requires that any early voting location that's open for early voting also be an Election Day polling place. Those are the primary changes that you will see in this particular legislation. And I will defer to our counties to speak to some of the details on how implementing these different components is going to have an effect on their established process and procedure. A couple of things that I'd like to also remind the committee about. In this bill, while the bill had an effective date of September 1, 2025, the bill also had language that said that the Secretary of State's office was charged with writing a report and publishing this report to determine the start date of implementation for this program. So the bill gave us some time to try to figure out how this was going to work to make sure that our counties were prepared and able to move forward with implementation of this bill. And so we have been working very aggressively to educate our counties on what 2753 means, how it will impact them, and what are the potential cost implications. We are very aware at the Secretary of State's office that while we have an expertise in election law and policy, we are not the practitioners. We are not the individuals conducting elections. And so we have worked very hard to make sure that our county election officials have had a very loud voice in the discussions that we are having about implementation, and that any recommendations that we have are driven by our community and our broad community. We're making sure that we reach out to as many individuals as possible. In order to make sure that we are proceeding properly with our role at the Secretary of State's office, we created a steering committee for the implementation of 2753. This steering committee consists of county election officials from all over the state. In addition to that, we have several county judges that are sitting on our steering committee as well, as our county judges really can speak to some of the budget implications that counties can expect to see with respect to this bill, and they can help us be good ambassadors to other county officials to make sure that it's not just the election community that's understanding how this bill will impact our individual counties. In addition to that, also noting that it's not just counties that conduct elections in Texas. We have a representative from the Texas Municipal Clerks Association representing the cities. Our city interests in this. It's a city that runs their own elections, helping us speak to those entities that run elections on their own that don't contract with counties but would also have to comply with this. And we have another representative who works with a lot of water districts. Her law firm supports water districts and other special law districts out there to speak to the experience of those smaller districts that also don't always contract with their county in running elections. In our work with the steering committee, we began meeting in September of 2025. We have met many times to discuss the legislation to make sure that as a committee we fully understand the components of this bill. In the course of meeting with the steering committee, we also realized that due to the complex nature of some of these changes and some of the confusion related to terminology with early voting versus election day versus this kind of idea of a single voting period, that we needed to do a more aggressive educational campaign with our county election officials. We had issued written guidance, we had done some webinars, we had done some, had spoken at conferences, but it wasn't the same as when we worked with counties on an individual level, and we really worked hard on the details of this bill and how it relates to individual counties. And so with the direction of the steering committee, the Secretary of State's office created a workshop for Senate Bill 2753. In that workshop, what we have done is we have created a more in-depth educational component where we are teaching our counties about what this bill does. We also have created a workbook and a series of worksheets to help them with cost implications. We are very fortunate at the Secretary of State's office. We have a team of 15 election trainers that work for us. These are former election officials. Many of them are retired or have just moved on from their role in the county to come work for the Secretary of State's office, and they work with our counties all across the state. So these are individuals that know and understand what it's like to be in the role of our county election officials. And they worked very hard to create templates for these worksheets to help with cost calculations so that our election officials, and in particular our newer election officials that may not have the historical knowledge on how to plan and project for changes like this, can have some easy worksheets to fill in numbers and get cost projections that they can use to help us, the Secretary of State's office, I think, understand their local situation, but that they can also use to work with their county commissioners and county judges to make sure that they are explaining and demonstrating what changes in the election process can mean for them from a budget perspective. So to date, we began the workshop process in the spring. We kind of workshopped our workshop, if you will, with the members of our steering committee, and we're very grateful to our steering committee for volunteering to allow us to come on site to their counties and work with their election offices and their teams on this concept. After we refined the workshop process, we rolled it out more broadly over the summer. And so we have actually conducted workshops with a total of 192 counties across the state. 16 of those counties have had individual county workshops where we went on site and just worked with that county individually. And when I say that, I mean we sent a team out there, 2 to 3 people, in some cases a little bit more, depending on the size of the county, to work with the county office and any other county personnel that they invited. Many of our counties were including their county auditors, county attorneys, of course, county judges and county commissioners in some counties were participating as well. We did 16 counties where we tried a hybrid format where we had part of it in person, part of it remote. So we had kind of a central clearinghouse to provide information. But the majority of our workshops, 160 of the counties that attended workshops, did it through regional trainings that our office offered throughout the summer. We had 15 regional trainings this summer all across Texas, and this was a big part of these workshops of these regional trainings, was to conduct these workshops to make sure that our counties were getting as much individual attention as they could and had a forum where they could ask questions and discuss with each other how they were going to tackle some of the new challenges with this legislation. In conducting workshops with 192 entities, I will say it was 191 counties in one city that attended our workshop. And that is part of our plan here in the fall, is to work more aggressively now with some of our other local political subdivisions to get them more involved and informed about this process. But in working with our election officials, the ones that have boots on the ground, the ones that are actually going to be doing the work related to this bill, we did see some trends on some things that individuals were concerned about. And I'm going to relate to you some things that I think would be good for the legislature to consider going forward based on the discussions that we had from with our election officials across the state. First and foremost, there was some concern about the hours related to this particular bill. There are some very strict hour requirements, requiring in some cases 12-hour days, those last few days of the early voting process leading up to Election Day. Again, single voting period, but the days leading up to Election Day. For some of our smaller and mid-sized counties, that's going to be very challenging. Those are days already, for some of them, where they have extremely low turnout, and they don't necessarily have the locations that'll give them the ability to be open on those days, and the workers that can be open on those days. And so there is a concern about having those 12-hour days for our smaller and mid-sized counties that may have some financial considerations, and even just have worker considerations, may not have the personnel to support that. And so there may need to be a discussion about providing some more flexibility to some of our counties regarding the hours and perhaps some of the locations that they're using during that time period. Another consideration that was brought up, and I briefly alluded to this earlier, was the situation relating to security requirements for ballot boxes for early voting versus Election Day. Under current law, our early voting ballot boxes have to have 2 locks with 2 separate keys. One of those keys is held by the sheriff. And so if there's a reason to need to get into that ballot box, you have to have 2 individuals coming together in order to gain access to that ballot box. That is a requirement that has been in state law for many, many, many years. And in fact, when that law first came about, it was before we had precinct-level tabulation with our ballots. We were talking about pre-locked, pre-sealed ballot boxes where voters were depositing blank ballots in a ballot box, and that ballot box was being taken to a central location for counting. And so that security was absolutely necessary to ensure unauthorized access to the ballot box. What we hear now from our counties just in general with this 2-lock requirement is every once in a while you have paper jams or you have a ballot box that gets full during the early voting period and you need to make changes. You may need to send people out there to remove ballots for secure storage if the ballot box gets full or address technical issues. And so they're used to having to do that now for the early voting period. They can make some adjustments to make that happen, though it is difficult in some counties. But that's going to be much more difficult on Election Day when you have a lot more locations that are open. And so for those locations that are serving as early voting locations that will now also be Election Day locations, we have a situation where we have an extra lock on that ballot box that's going to make it harder for that election judge to do what they need to do to monitor and deal with issues that might come up in the voting process. And so our counties are going to have to get creative about how they're going to handle that transition from 2 locks to 1 lock. Not all counties have the ability to send the sheriff out to all of these locations the day before Election Day to either remove the second lock or transfer chain of custody of that key to the second lock to the election judge or to somebody with the election office. And so there's unique challenges there, and it varies considerably depending on the type of resources that that county has. And so that's something I would encourage you to listen for and to ask some of our county election officials about what their plans are in that area, because that sounds like a minor issue, but from a logistics standpoint can be quite complicated. Another thing that we've heard about repeatedly from our counties is that it has to do with the appointment of election workers. Election workers the appointment of election workers, there's different requirements on how election workers have to be appointed for Election Day versus early voting. And that comes into play with some locations where if that early voting location is going to be an Election Day polling place as well, who maintains responsibility over that location, over the reconciliations, over the documentation? It may be that judge has to change over based to a different party even from Election Day to early voting, depending on how the geographic representation of judges may be across the county. And so it's really our larger counties that have expressed concern about this, where they do have to have, I think, more negotiations with the parties to make sure we have representation appropriate. And because there are different rules from early voting to Election Day, perhaps considering syncing those up and having more consistency across the board will make it easier for our counties to navigate that transition. And then finally, the last thing that we heard from our counties has to do specifically with precinct-based voting. In Texas right now, we have about 100 counties that are part of our countywide polling place program. The remaining counties that we have use traditional precinct-based voting. For our counties that are countywide, I do want to also be very clear, these are our largest counties. By and large, it's the larger counties that have moved that direction. And that is in part because a lot of our smaller counties don't have the volume of polling places that may necessitate a move to countywide. And based on current rules with combining and consolidation, oftentimes consolidate or combine down and have almost like a countywide setup in some situations without having to traditionally be under that countywide polling place program, just because of the geography of their county, population centers, and some of the existing rules that are there. And I will tell you what I've heard repeatedly from our counties is that there is a strong desire from some of our counties to move towards countywide in evaluation of implementation of this bill, because it will be a harder transition for our precinct-based counties to transition from this, with this continuous early voting period, to go where everybody can vote anywhere in the county up through the day before Election Day, and then the next day to convert that to precinct-based, because you have to leave that location open and now converts to a precinct-based location. They do have more challenges. Part of that is related to voter understanding of the election process. You know, you're telling voters you can vote everywhere in the county up until Election Day, and then they have to move to that precinct-based setup. There's going to be some communication challenges there. But in addition to that, remember, with precinct-based voting, you have to have a voting location, a polling place in every county election precinct or combined precinct. That may not be the same location that you typically use for early voting in that area. And if you can only have one location per polling place, or I'm sorry, one polling place per voter registration precinct, it creates a scenario where the location you may typically use for Election Day may no longer be able to be used because it can't also serve as an early voting period. And so you may have to get rid of traditional polling places that your communities are accustomed to using or comfortable using, because you can't close down that early voting polling place. And so there are some unique challenges there. I know that there are some individual counties that are here, some of them that have precinct-based voting that can speak to their circumstances. And so I would encourage you to ask questions of those individuals, because I think they can speak to some of those challenges in a little bit more detail than I can. I can give you the big picture, but they're the experts in that area. And so that's what we're hearing from our counties. We recently had a steering committee meeting. It was on last Thursday, July 30th. I think that was the 30th. And we had a meeting with our steering committee where we presented these findings, discussed how the workshops have been going, and all of our steering committee members have participated in workshops. They've all, in addition to working with our office directly through the steering committee, have been leaders and participants in the workshop process. And we discussed implementation timeframes. And it was unanimous. Every individual on the steering committee made the recommendation that we should not implement this bill until next year, after we have had time to work through some of these issues, do more training with our counties, and perhaps visit with the legislature about some potential changes that would make implementation much easier and go much more smoothly, not just for our counties, but for our voters as well. And so that is the recommendation that the steering committee has made. I think there will be a formal letter where they sign off on the recommendations. And that, I will say, at the Secretary of State's office, you know, after doing all of this work, and it's been quite a bit that our team has done, I think we are in agreement that delaying implementation till next year is the right course of action for our state. There is still work to be done to make sure that we are implementing this very big change in election law in a way that is meeting the concerns of our counties, that is addressing budget concerns, legitimate budget concerns that they have, because we are so late in the budget process for them for next year, for this coming year, and making sure that we are doing what we can to educate our voters about these changes so that everybody is aware and knows what's happening, and we can move into this new way of doing things in a very smooth and efficient way.
So let me say real quick, there is no issue at all if we don't think we're ready to make this move by November this year. I want to be very transparent and very clear about that. We are a local control state. We're 250 counties and many cities and ISDs. We have lots and lots of elections throughout the state of Texas. We have 33 million citizens, a couple 100,000 square miles. An election in the state of Texas is not the same as an election in Delaware, for example. So I want everybody here in this committee room and the public to know there is zero problem if the working group does not feel that we are ready to implement this. There is zero problem. We do not want any type of election failures in our state. And so if that means that we need more time to implement it, this is an incredibly complex implementation. It is an incredibly complex transformation of the way we do elections in our state. So I want to make sure it's very clear. There is zero issue if we have to delay certification of this process. Thank you, Maine.
Thank
You
you.
may continue.
that is all I have as far as giving you an overview of the bill itself and the efforts that our steering committee has taken. But I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Chair Busey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One, I want to say, I agree with you, and I agree with you that we need to make sure we get this right and we have the time to do it right. But I also want to say, I was proud of the work that this committee did in a bipartisan way, that ultimately the chamber did and the Senate did. I think in the 8 years that I've been on this committee, this is one of the most significant shifts to increase voter access in the state of Texas. We're talking about continuous voting. We're talking about 2 weekends of access without losing days. And I think that is ultimately going to be a win for all of the people of Texas. We know this state could do better in participation, and this is a way that's going to help working Texans have more access to the ballot box. With that said, I know there's a lot of challenges. I know we're going to hear about it. I think we have an obligation to make sure that we hear those challenges and meet those needs with the financial needs, the policy needs, and ultimately the time needs to get it done right, because we want it to be done right. But I'm excited how we all worked on this together. I think we're going to look back on this once we get through the headache of getting it implemented as a win for Texans. And so I'm just proud to be a part of this, and I want to take the rest of this hearing to hear the concerns open and honestly, so we take the time to get it right and make sure we get it. Because I hear the concerns. I know it's scary, but I think this is going to be a win in the end. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the hard work y'all are doing. It sounds like lots of meetings and lots of seriousness being put in this. I was curious, have you and Secretary Howden had a chance to talk about this bill at all? I know he's brand new on the job, and his philosophy, I know we met with Secretary Nelson a lot about this bill, and just is he sharing the same, kind of trajectory for getting this?
I think everyone at the Secretary of State's office has had the same, I think, reaction to hearing what the discussions from our counties, to hearing the concerns that are out there. I mean, there's definitely a willingness to work through these issues. And I would say that Secretary Howden, from the little bit that I have visited with him about this, but also everyone else in our executive team, I think is in agreement that we want to make sure we're not moving too fast on something that's this big.
Yeah, I agree.
We want to make sure we're doing it the right way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Swanson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our chairman, vice chairman, for reiterating and really stressing that we don't want to start this until it can be done right. And as you know, and former Secretary of State Nelson, I had extreme concerns about this. I think many people just out there, voters out there, just thought, this would just simplify everything. You just show up one more day, like no changes, right? And we needed to hear from you guys that this is a big deal. It's very much a huge thing to change. And so there's just so many nuts and bolts that even your legislators don't know that y'all go through out there, but definitely the typical voter doesn't know. So I ended up with some questions just that came from your introduction there. Okay, so I want to clarify, like, this bill I know allowed for more combining of precincts, but that only affects those counties that don't do countywide voting. Is that correct?
No, even our counties that do countywide have the ability to combine to eliminate the overall required total that they have to have for their county.
Right, okay, just clarifying that because I'd heard both ways. But what percentage, and is it 40% or 50%, somewhere in there, of people who wait till the very last day to vote?
That varies depending on the election, but I would say that's probably a pretty fair estimate depending on the election, that the majority of our voters vote during early voting, 60%. I've seen it even go higher on some years that vote during early voting. But yes, I would say that's probably a good estimate as to the number of folks that wait.
I think apparently in every county, but I know in Harris County, that requires us to have far, far more voting locations on Election Day. And I know that there were, some legislators, none here today, but who thought that there would not be any changes. Like, we allowed for combining precincts, so therefore you just show up an extra day. On the final day, there will be no changes. But I'll be interested to hear from the different size counties, and especially from Harris County, how many more locations we have to set up. One of my concerns as a longtime election judge for many, many years was everything I saw that went on during those 3 days to get set up to have somebody in all these other locations. I'm wondering, like, where's the manpower going to be found to do all of that? You know, you touched on, yes, somebody has to get a key out everywhere. So that's one thing that has to be done. But who's going to set up all those supply boxes and be there when all the election judges show up to get their supplies and just all of that stuff? Because it was always all the same people in the past. They finished working early voting, then they went and did the supply stuff for those 3 days. So also, I had a question on the key thing. Okay, so if we've had 2 keys for much higher security during early voting and a sheriff, I assume he can hand it off to a deputy sheriff, protected those ballots from being removed, those ballots are now going to stay in there through actual election day, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're going to go down to only the election judge having a key. So we're now losing a lot of security because all of those ballots that were protected by having 2 keys, one of them being held by the sheriff, are now, whoever the election judge is, that person has access to all the ballots. I think we need to really look at that and figure out if that's the way we want to leave things. It's very low security now. One of the keys was held by the sheriff, the other one by who?
The election judge. The election
Okay.
judge. And what I would say to that is, even with this 2-lock requirement for early voting, the law right now says that the ballot boxes have to have 1 lock and security seals. I mean, there's other security, measures in place for election day, but that's by necessity because that election judge has to be able to close the polls on election day. They've got to get the ballots out to transport them back to the county. So that's why we don't have a 2-lock requirement like that for election day now, because as a practical matter, those ballots are being, that election judge maintains chain of custody over the ballots, and they're returning them back to the county. And so right now, that if there were a 2-lock requirement for election day right now, we would have to have sheriff's deputies at every polling place at the end of the night. So that's why that's only an early voting requirement and not an election day requirement. It's just by design.
We just need
and
to
with
look at that
logistics.
because we've now lowered the amount of security for all of those ballots that were voting during early voting. It's just something to look at. So is it my understanding that the bill allows for every county now to go to countywide voting?
It doesn't provide any special avenue for going to countywide. If a county wants to be part of the countywide polling place program, they still have to go through the application process, and they still have to have the public hearing, apply to our office, take measures to educate their community. They still have to do that, and which ultimately means that the Commissioner's Court has to make that decision. And so
But
what
we
the bill
have
did,
had something where they could get in line to do it, but only like 10 per
so what the
cycle could
Yes,
do
ma'am,
it. But
you're
now
correct.
it's unlimited. How many can apply? Is that right?
What it was is that it had caps on the number of counties that could transition to countywide per election, and it just removed those caps.
That's what I'm talking about
Yes,
right
ma'am.
there, yes. Because many of the people who wanted this bill that initiated it also want to get rid of countywide voting and go back to precinct level voting, and it seems to me this bill like conflicts with that. So, okay, so how would we fix the concern with the 12-hour day voting in those counties? They simply provide money, or
I think
how would you
there's
solve
2
that?
ways. I think the counties would say that some additional funding would always be helpful to them because there is a cost to staffing polling locations, especially on weekends when they oftentimes can't use their own, as an early voting clerk, they can't always use their own personnel on the weekends. They have to get other folks to come in and assist. So there's definitely a cost there, but I think the thing that what I'm hearing from the counties would allow for the greater almost greater assistance is more flexibility in the number of hours. Our smaller counties may not need 12-hour days for voting, especially we're hearing from a lot of them on Sundays in particular. That is not a high turnout day for them. Looking at voting trends in the past, Sundays are just not high turnout days, and they just don't have success in finding locations and workers that'll be open over the weekend. And so I think some flexibility in maybe reducing, allowing them to have fewer hours so that they're not having to get as many workers, and perhaps giving them a little bit more flexibility on locations that they can use for early voting might help.
As you know, I passed a bill a couple of sessions back, increasing the hours, trying to align
ma'am.
the hours everywhere. I have concerns about the legality, even the constitutionality, if it were challenged, of treating rural voters differently than urban and suburban voters. I mean, it's really not fair that they have a lot fewer opportunities, and certainly before my bill, they really had a lot fewer opportunities to vote than voters in the urban areas. Like, I don't see how that's even constitutional. I really think it could be challenged. What's your take on that?
That's a great question because, that was our scheme for a number of years, is that the counties had flexibility. In fact, not all counties even had weekend voting. They only did for certain elections, or they did if it was petitioned for. And so
If it
I
was
don't- I'm
what,
not-
petitioned?
It was petitioned for. And in the past, it
Okay.
would may be that some counties didn't have that weekend voting, but people could petition the county to add weekend voting in. There's been some variations in the law over the years, and we'd be happy to look back and see if there have been any challenges or any cases questioning that particular
I think we
component.
ought to
We'll do
see
some
whether that
research on
breaks
that.
federal law.
We'll do
Okay,
some
or
research
court
on that and look
cases.
into that. That's a
Okay.
great question.
All
I'm
right.
not aware of any challenges that I can reflect back on, but I'll look and see if there's
Okay.
ever been litigation there.
And my final area I have questions and concerns on is, it was your third point on appointment of election judges, because that was not considered when we passed the bill, and we'll definitely need to do something because, as you know, during early voting, it's whichever party won the last gubernatorial race in that
Correct.
county. So therefore, in Harris County, we have all Democrat election judges at every single early voting location in the county. But on election day, it has to be apportioned according to how the county voted. And so we
percentage.
pick up, Republicans get about 45% of election judges. So you could have a lot of locations, excuse me, as you were referring to, where all of a sudden that election judge who's been running that early voting location all during early voting now legally must be replaced by a member of the minority party. So how would you suggest we fix that? Do you think we need to go to all during early voting is also by percentage of the governor's race, or what?
I think consistency, one or the other. I think our counties are saying as long as it's the same for both, that's what matters. I've heard before concerns about that proportionality question for early voting. And so it may be, since we're treating it as a continuous voting period, that we need to think about proportionality across the board. I think I would be curious to hear what some of our counties think about that and what their experience is in working with the parties on obtaining workers, if there are nuances from early voting to election day that we may not be aware of. But I think the key is just consistency, one or the other. But I will say I have heard in the past, representatives, some concerns about not having that proportionality for early voting.
Okay, but definitely it would cause a complication if we left it the way it is, because you'd
Yes,
have
ma'am.
to switch out on
Yes,
election day.
what we're hearing is that, some judges that are coming in may not want to take possession of all those records or be responsible for the records, because they're essentially, at the end of the day, when they're delivering their ballots and delivering the records from that polling place back to the county, they're signing off that everything's accurate. And they may not know what was happening during early voting. They may have
okay.
concerns about that. They may
Yes.
not have been the ones reconciling votes and ballots and voters, the number of voters that voted every day, looking at those numbers. And so I think what the counties are telling us is that there's been concerns, that they have concerns about that transition maybe not going as smoothly for some workers. And just concerns in that area with that transition. And I can understand that as an election judge, having some concerns about signing off on, you're there for one day, but that location was open for 12 days, and you have concerns about signing off on what somebody else may have done.
Right,
So
okay.
I do understand that I can see where there may be some tension points there, and so at least having a more uniform process across that voting period, I think would help.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any other questions? Let the chair recognize Ms. Plesha is here. Did
I
have a
heard you were
question?
having a quorum problem, Chairman.
Well, I think we're good now. Thank you, ma'am, very much.
Thank you.
Chair calls Ms. Jennifer Doinoff, representing the Texas Association of County Election Officials, and yourself. Oh, gosh.
Good morning.
Hello, ma'am. How are you? I show you registered as Ms. Jennifer Doinoff, and you are representing the Texas Association of County Election Officials and yourself. You are testifying on the topic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, you
Thank
may proceed. Thank you for being back.
Thank you, Chairman Shaheen, Vice Chair Busey, and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jennifer Doinoff. I am the chair for the Texas Association of County Election Officials. I want to start by first thanking Senator Hall and Representative Isaac, both of whom we've had several meetings with on some of the findings that you just heard from Ms. Atkins. They've been working with us, and they have shown a willingness to work with county election officials to understand and address the concerns, some of which you've heard, in implementing Senate Bill 2753. As the committee knows, 2753 would move early voting and election day together to a single voting period, which is a major logistical issue to our election process. Senate Bill 2753 is a complicated bill, and counties in partnership with SOS had diligently worked together since its passage to understand all of the major election process changes, cost impacts, potential legislative actions that may need to be addressed, and concerns for the implementation of this bill. As the work continues, Texas Association of County Election Officials appreciates the opportunity to highlight feedback identified by our members. Counties have already adopted their budgets for the 26-27 fiscal year. So as Christina had mentioned previously, implementing this bill anytime this year would be very difficult because counties have not been able to budget any of these changes into their current budgets. Some counties expect to experience high financial costs in implementing 2753, particularly for election worker staffing and in preparation for Election Day. For example, counties use the current 3-day gap after early voting to set up their polling locations on Election Day. Losing that window will increase costs and ensure that those locations can be opened up. In some cases, counties may have hundreds more locations that need to be opened on Election Day versus early voting, and you'll hear about that in some future testimony. And that must now be done while running the election, which means that we'll have to hire additional staff to do that. During a continuous voting period, there will be 2 weekends of voting for over 12-hour days on the last 4 days, generally in general and primary elections. Actually, the point there is that we're adding a whole week of 12-hour days to primary runoff elections as well. And so that's a much longer period than what we're used to seeing in primary runoff elections, which generally don't have a lot of voting. And also the time period is crunched with your May elections. So we really need to take a closer look at that as well. The addition of the second Sunday, 9 hours, will cause some counties to lose churches as polling sites. And already we're hearing that voting on holidays can make it difficult to find workers on those days. Certain sections of the election code likely will need to be clarified given the creation of the election period. This applies to things like the ballot box keys that you've heard, the authority of the early voting ballot board, and the process for conducting the post-election hand count audits. And so if you remember, we passed a law in the last session regarding the post-election hand count audit, and it's been a great law. The process has worked out well and the implementation has gone smoothly, but there is language in that law based on the difference between counting early voting and election day locations. So that's something we may need to look at. And then maybe most importantly, and something that may be very overlooked, is the need to educate our public on this change. We haven't talked a lot about that, but we need to put a really big campaign together, not only from our association standpoint, but in collaboration with the Secretary of State's office. Because under 2753, all election results will be reported together, meaning results will likely come out several hours later than what voters and candidates are currently used to. Even so, elections will remain accurate, but the public must be aware of these changes because this is exactly how misinformation gets started. So we need some time to really put some effort, thought, and finance into making sure that the public is aware of this change. Beyond education, there are a couple of initial areas we've identified that would help counties in implementation. First, allowing November 2027 constitutional amendment election to be the first election we consider this. This would allow counties to be able to budget timely for implementation of the bill and make sure that we can cover those expenses. Evaluate the hours and days requirements under Senate Bill 2753. Counties of all sizes have flagged this as a major need for a variety of reasons. Excuse me, in some cases, it's because election officials are staffed by combo clerks with one or no full-time employees and other responsibilities that can't be neglected. Additionally, this could help ensure counties can adequately find polling locations, and many are not willing to allow counties to be there for 2 weekends, or also to deliver equipment way ahead of time, which I think we heard last year could be an option. Require counties with over 100,000 registered voters to utilize countywide polling place program to ensure efficient implementation. Increase the primary allotment to the Secretary of State's office to assist with some of the funding that's necessary to particular to the primary election. We share the legislator's goal of working with counties to implement this seamlessly, and Texas counties need a little bit more time, guidance, and resource to do it the right way. To build on that, TASIO has reached out to election officials in Arkansas and Illinois whose laws closely align with that we're seeking in Senate Bill 2753. And our organization is working on a more detailed voting schedule and other recommendations to look forward to providing each of you. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Members, any questions? What, on the issue with respect to the need to do countywide versus precinct, what, are you getting any kind of response from, like, the political parties at all? Have they been engaged yet, or?
We
is
have
it-
not heard
Okay.
anything from the political parties, but as was mentioned earlier, really, there are different rules between early voting and election days in regards to reporting, equipment, logistics, and everything else. So
Yep.
I think for larger counties, seamless implementation of this bill would require them to be considered for the countywide polling place
Yeah,
program.
okay.
And there is somebody here who can testify more to that.
Yeah, I think at some point there'll probably need to be a discussion with them as well. I think there's different desires with respect to countywide versus precinct level voting, and that dialogue at some point probably needs to happen.
Absolutely. And if I may, I want to respond to Representative Swanson's concern about the hours. I am not getting a sense from our association that we're wanting to really change hours for different counties. I think more the goal is to, and we already have it in the law, flexibility in what those hours are. I think currently it's, you can vote for up to 9 hours. Excuse me, and I think we're not looking to change that. What we are more concerned about is the 12-hour requirement for the last 4 days, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think probably the sensitivity to Sundays probably was missed also in the
Yes.
bill, so that will probably be revisited so that people can go to church in the morning, and then if they want to vote after church. And that's just typically how things were done, and I think that was probably missed, so.
Okay.
Members, any other? Oh, did you have a, Ms.
Yes, a
Swanson?
little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really good for us to hear all that. As you probably know, this bill flew through the House at the very last moment, and just did not get hearings. And we thought it was going to be a study, and then on the floor it got changed. And I fought very hard and with the chairman and others to make sure that it at least because it was going to take effect immediately, because many people just thought, we're going to simplify everything for y'all. Won't you love this bill? You just show up an extra day and everything's done. And so it takes hearing from all of you out there implementing things, and y'all tell us about stuff that, most legislators never dreamed about. So, and there just wasn't really time to examine the bill or hear from anyone, but that's the nature of the legislature, Anyway, are you telling me that the bill requires the same number of days and hours for primary runoffs as it does for a major general election?
Yes.
Oh, that needs to be fixed. That's
I think our
ridiculous.
workers would probably agree.
Okay. Yeah, what'd you say? Okay, yeah, we need definitely even.
Unless I'm reading that wrong.
Yeah,
Might
I
maybe
just want our
ask the
rural
Secretary
voters
of
to be
State's
treated the
office.
same, but I don't want, even if that means that the legislature has to give money, but what I don't want is like just ridiculous number of days that, for everybody. I don't think that we need that. And I had already agreed and understood we need to educate voters. We probably need to give some money to the Secretary of State's office to do that. But you came up with one thing that they need to add into any education that I hadn't thought about, is how much later the results will come out. Because we're used to seeing 50s to 60% of the voters, have already voted before Election Day. So 7 p.m., 7:01, boom, there are the results. So I suppose you could still give us the mail ballot votes, right? Or did we change that on you too? Can you give us the mail ballot votes? Or all your people are still out in the field holding elections
I think that
and
is
can't
broken
do
out
it?
into a different bucket, so.
That
I
part,
believe,
yes.
I'm getting the nod
So
that
if
that's
you have
yes.
the manpower up there, if they're not all out in the precincts, then you could at least distribute that. Something would come out at 7:01, but not much of the vote, only the mail ballot vote, which can be drastically different from the in-person vote. So we need to look at Sundays. I would really appreciate, if y'all were here yesterday, you heard me ask several people, like, give us your wish list of things that you feel the legislature would have to change.
Okay.
If the SOS can fix it, give them your wish list, okay? But don't hand us 25 pages and go, here, read this and figure it out for yourself. That's not real effective. So I would ask each of you to say, and if you have the ability to show us the line like if you could change this and section that. But if not, if you don't want to do that, at least tell us exactly what you think the legislature needs to change this session. Can you do that for us?
We absolutely
And
can. We're
I would
already
ask
working on it.
anybody else who's, please, we need your input. Thank you.
And we do appreciate also that y'all were able to give us some time to implement this the right way.
Yeah, I think we'll have to have more discussion on what y'all just talked about, because I think the concept of some results coming out at 7:01, I think that's gone, right? Because your mail-in ballots won't even be complete by then. So that's probably an area where we probably need to communicate as well, maybe earlier than later, is making sure elected officials and the parties understand the whole 7:01 on election night that's gone. That concept is gone, I think. So anyhow, we probably need to talk about that more.
I think so too. I think this first phase was identifying potential places where we're going to need to look further and address it. I think the next phase will be just what you're talking
I think I have
about, coming
heartburn
back
about it
with
now that I'm thinking
solutions.
Well, you can thank me for throwing such a fit to make sure that we gave a long implement. I will totally take credit, but
No, I'm glad you did.
the chairman really backed me up on that, so thank you. Otherwise, we would have implemented it immediately. So I do want to hear more from anybody who wants to kick in on this process that if we don't change the law, then we have different people who were in charge all of early voting and versus that day. And not only might that election judge who takes over that day, but wasn't there all this, other days may not feel like signing off. What about the person who was the early voting judge, and then now they're having to hand their key over? I don't know, how did they get their key to the election judge? We haven't even talked about that, because
Right.
it's got to get from one election judge to the other if you're changing parties, if we don't change the law on this. And if I had been responsible and felt like I ran it very, very well during all those days of early voting, and then I've got to randomly hand my key off to somebody else who's going to turn in my stuff, I'd be nervous if I were that first person too. So I definitely think we need to
Take a look at that.
to address that. Do you have any comments on that?
So we have identified that as an issue. We haven't identified the solution yet. I don't know if there's a way to change that due process. I don't know if it's going to require legislative change, but I think it's something we need to look deeper into. Maybe there's a daily reporting reconciliation process that can take place that we can then hand that over. These are just thoughts off the top of my head.
You wouldn't have the ballots separated though.
Yeah, no, the ballots are clearly under the bill all in one place.
Right. Okay. Be thinking on that if you would.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Busey?
Just clarification, I'm pretty sure because it's 2 buckets instead of 3 now, we could still get mail ballots rapidly if they were counted. So that could be closer to 7 o'clock on election day.
From my understanding of the bill, though, they can't start counting until 7 p.m. on election night.
I don't think that's right.
I don't know.
Well,
But we could probably
processing mail ballots and counting are two different things. We get that question all the time. So we wouldn't be able to release results or actually push tabulate before 7.
But it could all be prepped and then
Right.
yeah.
Again, that's,
So right now, there's been 3 buckets, and it's gonna go down to 2 buckets, and they're not bound by each other for releasing the data,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah,
that's my understanding.
yeah.
But maybe something else we need to look at too.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chair calls Tanisha Hudspeth, representing herself. Hello, ma'am. I show
Good
you
morning.
Good morning.
Good
For
morning.
50 more minutes. I show you registered as Tanisha Hudspeth. You are representing yourself, and you are testifying on the topic. Is that true?
That is
All
true.
right, you may proceed. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Chairman Shaheen, Vice Chair Busey, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Tanisha Hudspeth, Harris County Clerk and Chief Election Official. During the 89th legislative session, I served on the legislative team and following the session participated in the Texas Secretary of State SB 2753 Steering Committee. Thank you to Senator Hall and Representative Isaac for the willingness to work with all election officials. SB 2753 represents one of the most significant operational changes to Texas elections in recent years. While it expands voting opportunities by extending early voting through the day before Election Day, it also creates substantial implementation challenges for counties, particularly large counties like Harris County. My concern focus is on 4 areas: cost, operations, staffing, and election night reporting. First, the financial impact is significant. Using data from previous elections, Harris County estimates that SB 2753 could increase the cost of administering a large countywide election, such as a presidential election, by nearly 30%, while smaller elections could increase by approximately 9%. These costs include additional staffing, equipment, logistics, and voter education. Although some expenses will be a one-time investment, most will be ongoing, and the legislation does not provide dedicated state funding for implementation. Second, the law eliminates the traditional preparation period between early voting and Election Day. That transition time has been essential for prepping polling locations, deploying equipment, resolving issues, and finalizing Election Day operations. Without it, counties must maintain continuous election operations and significantly expand staffing for recruitment, training, technical support, call center operations, ADA support, and field response. These challenges are amplified in Harris County. Since October of 2025, we have conducted 8 consecutive elections, including 3 simultaneous elections in the month of May. Our operations expand from approximately 60 to 80 early voting locations to 600 to 700 election day vote centers. So, on early voting, we have anywhere for a November election, 60 to 80 early voting locations. And then when you get to election day, it goes from 600 to 700, depending on the November election type. Obviously, smaller elections has reduced polling locations, but with the sheer size of Harris County, if it is a countywide, we must have a certain amount of polling locations. Supporting the level of continuous operations requires substantially more personnel and resources. Additionally, many polling locations cannot be reserved for extended periods due to overlapping election schedules. Finally, SB 2753 will delay election night reporting. Because early in-person ballots and ballots by mail will no longer be reported shortly after 7 p.m. on Election Day, results will be released even later than Texans have come to expect. Poll workers must complete closing procedures, reconcile election records, and transport materials before results can be delivered for tabulation, extending election night operations and increasing demands on poll workers and election staff. As implementation continues, it is important to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Counties differ significantly in size, resources, and election models. Harris County remains committed to working collaboratively with the Texas Secretary of State and the Legislature, recognizing that certain procedures will need to be addressed during the next legislative session to ensure the successful implementation of Senate Bill 2753, while continuing to conduct secure, accurate, and accessible elections for the voters we serve. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for being here. Members, any questions? Ms. Swanson?
I apologize again for the headaches we have caused you. And thank you for your positive attitude in trying to work on this. This sounds like a nightmare. Okay, so what I got out of this is you feel like your cost will go up 30% in big elections, 9% in small elections. You'll need a huge increase in staffing. Did you give us a percentage of how much? And
So-
will those be temporary staffers?
So a portion we will have to have full-time staffing. Training and other significant portions of the election process, we cannot have temps. We have to have individuals who know the content, who are able to do the work regularly. So in terms of full-time, we will have to double the size, the amount of full-time staff in just the elections department. So right now, we're a little bit under 200. We will need to double that to be able to handle the entire operations with the continuous work, as you mentioned earlier, going from early voting to election day, call center support, and things of that nature. Because we have so many election workers to support, for November, anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 individuals we're preparing for election day, right?
Wow.
In facilities. And then temps, that will increase tremendously as well. I don't have a percentage in front of me, but my teams are working. Every single division in the department is working to provide an estimate of what they believe their needs are going to be for each division within the election department.
Okay, and if I wrote your numbers down right, you're saying you have 60 to 80, that's 60 to 80 early voting locations, and 600 to 700 locations on Election Day?
That is correct.
Whoa, yes, I do think there were people who thought, it's just going to be another day, just show up one more day. Okay, so tell us, we had this discussion about the mail ballots. How is this, can the mail ballots still be released at 7:01, or has this bill changed that?
Possibly, but here is the concern for Harris County, and I'm sure for many other counties. That period in which early voting ends on Friday, we're able to reconcile a lot of work. And reconciling means preparing everything for counting on Election Day. If it is not until Election Day, then it is likely that the mail ballot results won't be ready right at 7 o'clock. And it is still a smaller portion of votes that, you know, the voters and campaigns and everyone else is used to seeing. It won't even, you know, tip the scale on the amount of the percentage of what voters in the community is used to seeing when it comes to election results on election night.
Yes, and it's all of you guys who will be slammed because everybody will be like, what's the matter? And
we will definitely need funding and support to educating Texas as a
Yes.
whole and our constituents on just how major this change is.
Right.
Because of course, they're gonna not be so happy with the election officials that don't have results out, and, you know, the conspiracy theories begin.
Well, yeah, well, you know, you can call Stan Stannard up and he can help console you. He got blamed for many things that were not his fault. Okay, so clarify again, have we changed something where you are not allowed to count those mail ballots until after 7? Or are you saying it's just going to be difficult because you don't have the manpower? Which one is it?
It will be and both, right? Particularly the manpower to focus on that. Right now, we have the appointees of ballot board and all those individuals, but I'll have to really look back at the bill with the Texas Secretary of State to see, will we really be able to release those results at 7:00 p.m.? Yes, a significant amount of work will be done, but will we have time to reconcile on Election Day? Because again, you can't count until right at 7:00 p.m.
Okay, so even right now, you're not allowed to count those mail ballots. Y'all are just have them set up and they, because
Set up
sometimes it's
to run
like
the drive at
7:01 or
7:00 p.m.
something.
That's correct.
They're out, okay. So once again, I'm asking you, we want our legislative wish list, okay? Can you get us that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I'm
all right.
already working on it. Our teams are working to really bring data and things to the table that will be helpful as we move into the next legislative session.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the 7 p.m. concept's gone, because not only that, but it's not I don't think it would be a representative sample. Like, I
No.
think people look at early voting and they're like, okay, things probably won't deviate all that much, whereas the mail-in and you can't start counting till 7 anyhow, so I think it's a moot point. But even if you somehow were able to release that, it probably wouldn't be that representative, I think, you know what I mean? I'm
And
thinking
if
out
I
loud.
could add, the amount of people that are voting by mail are decreasing by the election cycle.
Yeah.
They are not as, the numbers for mail ballot voting is nowhere nearly as high as it used to be, whether it's the USPS system or the Senate Bill 1, that we have seen drastic numbers decrease when it comes
Yeah.
to those who choose to vote by mail.
Yeah. Okay. This is the dialogue we want today. Anybody else? Thank you, ma'am, very much.
Thank
Very
you.
helpful. Chair calls Laura Rogers with the County District Clerks Association of Texas. Hello again. We show you registered as Laura Rogers. You're representing the County and District Clerks Association of Texas, and you are here testifying on the topic.
That is correct.
All right. Well, thanks for coming back. You may proceed.
Thank you. And I'm happy to follow up with Tanisha, because that way you get the biggest county perspective and then down to the small rural panhandle county. So that's perfect timing. Good morning. I'm Laura Rogers. I'm the County and District Clerk for Sherman County and the Elections Legislative Chair for the County and District Clerks Association. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today on SB 2753, which eliminates the gap between early voting and Election Day. I want to thank Senator Hall and Representative Isaac for being both accessible and receptive to hearing the implementation concerns from county clerks, election administrators, and county officials across Texas. The County and District Clerks Association looks forward to continuing to work with this committee and the legislature to ensure that all counties can properly implement SB 2753. SB 2753 could offer meaningful benefits to Texas voters. However, counties must be able to have the resources and flexibility to make this major process change successful. As we can just consider the logistical challenges to resolve a common issue across counties is their limited workforce, which has exacerbated issues in rural counties like Sherman. The same employees and Election Day workers often conduct early voting, prepare Election Day equipment, manage voter registration, process mail ballots, and work on Election Day. In my county, as a combo clerk, I am not only running the election, but I have several other statutory responsibilities involving court administration for county court, district court, vital statistics, and land record management. Although the total number of voting days is similar, staffing 13 consecutive days is very different from normal business hours with limited weekend hours. Also keep in mind that it takes about an hour to open the polls each day and about an hour to close the polls each day, so add on 2 hours each day of work for election officials. Eliminating the break between early voting and Election Day removes Sherman County's only opportunity to relocate equipment, prepare polling locations, complete required paperwork, and give workers a brief period of rest. Several counties have expressed concern that increased hours on Sundays will make it harder to use churches for polling locations, which many counties rely on, and potentially limit our pool of Election Day workers. 12 consecutive days plus Election Day may also affect the ability to use schools and community buildings as polling locations. As the committee evaluates SB 2753 election night reporting, the public must be made aware that early voting and Election Day ballots will be counted together. Texans are accustomed to seeing early voting totals shortly after 7 p.m., and delayed results could unintentionally create public confusion or distrust, even when election officials follow the law correctly. That is why CDCAT recommends a robust education campaign involving the Secretary of State's office and counties to ensure voters and candidates understand the changes. I serve on the Secretary of State's Working Group for SB 2753 implementation, and the SOS has already met with nearly 200 counties to help them understand the financial impacts of SB 2753, including personnel costs, overtime, facility rentals, security expenses, and equipment needs. That consultation and working group relationship is essential. Some smaller counties will benefit from SB 2753 because it will allow them to have one polling location, cutting down on staffing needs and costs and decreasing voter confusion in precinct-based voting counties. Additionally, SB 2753 allows counties to use the same polling locations and equipment throughout both early and Election Day voting, potentially reducing duplication. However, these benefits depend on the county and the voters. Sherman County is precinct-based with 1,300 registered voters. There is one early and 4 Election Day locations. My 2 Election Day locations are more than 20 miles from the courthouse, the main early voting location. Not having those locations open would place a burden on not just the elderly, but our farmers and ranchers who stop by and vote on their way to the fields. Before SB 2753 is implemented, the County and District Clerks Association encourages the legislature to evaluate increased funding for county election officials. That's the main one. Increased funding for county election officials. The days and hours requirements for the voting period. What works in urban counties does not mean the same for Sherman County. Increased flexibility for securing and managing polling locations throughout the election period. And coordinating election education for the public as it relates to election night reporting. The goals of increased voter access, participation, and efficiency are important. However, access must be supported by election procedures that counties can safely, accurately, and affordably administer. Thank you for your time today and the opportunity to share the potential benefits and practical implementation challenges associated with SB 2753. And I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And you're right, we have a lot of variety in our counties, so we want to hear from all the different ones. Members, any questions?
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
Mr.
Well,
Rossi?
more like a comment. I think we're seeing consistency, and I think it's something we need to really take to heart is the education campaign. I think from my perspective, an extra weekend of early voting outweighs the 7 p.m. you get your results. I just think to have more access, more participation, better results is a win. Even though we all want to treat this like a sporting event where you get the results immediately, I get that, but I think the extra time is worth the trade-off. Just for clarification, it looks like under the law, mail ballots can start being counted in large counties 4 days before Election Day, and in small counties at 7 a.m. on Election Day, and I think that's defined by 100,000 over. And then state law requires what we know at 7 p.m. to be reported. So there will be some reporting unless we tweak the law, still pretty close to 7 p.m. But I think the point of Harris County testimony earlier is it's going to be a significantly small number that may skew people's perception. So I think it goes back to more of the importance of the education campaign that we clearly need to take seriously with this implementation. But thank you.
And
Thank you,
Sherman County has roughly 8 to 12 mail ballots per election. And so we're not worried really about counting those, but releasing those would not be a true and accurate.
It'd be like one of those midnight elections, up in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I think that would cause huge issues.
Also, the prediction markets, which we've seen in this committee as an issue. So,
Yeah, that's a good point.
By that point, 7 p.m. would be closed.
Yeah, it wouldn't come out till 7.
No, I mean, so you have something out there on election data, but the other data is not coming until later. So no, I could see the prediction markets going nuts, actually. They're a separate problem that needs to be addressed. Gaming in general needs to be addressed. Anything else, ma'am? Ms. Swanson?
Yes. Once again, can you get us your legislative wish list?
Absolutely.
And kind of like back up any request for money, like back that up. Does anyone recall if this bill had a fiscal note? I bet it didn't. It should have.
I don't, the answer to your question is I don't remember, but probably not because those fiscal notes tend to focus on the state. But
You're right.
I don't.
Right. It did
I don't
not
know.
allow for how much
There is a
money.
fiscal note, it's just not on the state.
You're right. That makes sense.
And I would like to add that it's not just the financial impact in my office. It's me plus one full-time and one part-time employee, which I was told to give a shout out. So thank you, girls, for working today.
Yes, thank you.
It's not that we can put a physical amount on that because, like, I'm salaried, so my time is not going to be counted into a fiscal note. My employees' time, they receive comp time for their overtime. And so it's really more the amount of work that we're putting in and not getting that true compensation for. So we're going to have to hire some outside people to come in and
So-
help with that.
I will say I find the funding discussion interesting because broadly speaking, I'm going to become really unpopular here. So counties are local government. You have your budgets and you set your tax rate to cover your expenses. So you have the vehicle without additional state dollars to cover the additional expenses. Now, the response is going to be you're giving us a mandate or unfunded mandate. Counties are an extension of the state. So your whole existence is an unfunded mandate. You're an extension of the state, and the state tells you what you need to manage, and you have been given the authority to tax. And so I'm a little conflicted on the whole, because of this change, counties need more money. The legislature passes legislation every session that causes additional expenses to the counties. And so anyhow, I just wanted to
Of course, we have
throw that out
limited,
and
we've limited how much they can increase their taxes.
upset. Well, we've done that for everybody. They just need to control their budgets. But anyhow, I know I just made some friends, but I just wanted to
And that would be a
share
great,
that with everybody.
that'd be a great question for some of the county
We got a county
judges.
judge
Yes,
coming.
yeah.
He's
I don't get
looking
to
at
set
me
the
really
tax rate.
nasty right now. So
Uh-oh, yes.
But that would be a great question for them.
Okay.
okay.
One more question
Yes,
here.
ma'am.
You said something I didn't quite catch about, okay, so you have one location in early voting, and you have how many more on election day? And you said, if something or other, then I can't have those places open. Explain what you said.
So I have, all of our early voting takes place in the courthouse. That's kind of our central polling location for the courthouse. And then on election day, I open up 3 outside locations in my precincts. 2 of those locations are 20-plus miles from the courthouse. So even though under this bill, we probably could consolidate those down, practically speaking, keeping those open for like our farmers, ranchers that live 20 miles from town, it just wouldn't be practical to do in Sherman County. And that's also kind of one of the interesting aspects of the weekend voting. In most small rural counties, Sundays are actually our more popular days because a lot of our farmers and ranchers come to our one town that has the churches, has the grocery store. A lot of our people come into town on Sundays. Saturday is actually our slower day because that's the day everybody drives 30 miles to Walmart or drives an hour and a half to go to the movies. And so very few people are actually in town on Saturdays. So I really think it's going to vary in how your county is made up as to which day is going to be your more popular day on the weekend.
But
voting.
these other locations you opened, those are only for election day,
Those are only
right?
for election day.
So how would this bill have any effect on that? Can't you still open them on
You
election day?
absolutely can. And that's one of the benefits. And this bill is not going to greatly impact, especially rural counties. I think it's going to be more in the metropolitan,
Okay.
larger area that's going to be impacted.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, ma'am, very
Thank
much.
you.
Very helpful. Chair calls Frank Phillips, Denton County, representing Denton County and himself. Well, the election administrators are sitting next to each other. That's not good. You guys are right next to each other physically and geographically. It's kind of
Well,
cute.
we're both from Louisiana, so it's a little scary.
Oh, man. Sir, you'll have to step down. Just teasing. I show you registered as Frank Phillips. You are here representing Denton County and yourself, and you are here testifying on the topic.
Correct.
All right. Well, you're actually very welcome, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Chairman Shaheen, Vice Chair Busey, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak on SB 2753. My name's Frank Phillips. I serve as the Elections Administrator for Denton County. I've also had the privilege of serving on the SB 2753 Steering Committee. I want to begin to say that I'm excited about the concept of behind 2753, having long been an advocate of a voting period. I appreciate the author's efforts to improve our method of voting and create greater consistency in the election process. My goal today is not to oppose an election period, but to help ensure SB 27.3 can be successfully implemented in all Texas counties. One of the greatest challenges in election legislation is that Texas has 254 counties with very different election models. Some counties are precinct-based, while others are countywide polling places. Some use hand-marked paper ballots, some use ballot marking devices. Counties have different voting system vendors, and they range in size from 140 registered voters to over 2.6 million. Creating a process that works equally well for all of these counties is no small task, and consistency is critical. As written, 2753 presents two critical operational challenges for Denton County, who has 670,000 registered voters, because we are a precinct-based county, and we are also a non-joint primary county. First, precinct-based voting. Requiring every early voting location to remain in place for election day creates a significant logistical challenge to ensure that on election day, voters that are in the wrong location cannot accidentally be given a ballot style that they should not have in that voting location. So to mitigate that, we essentially have three options. We can deliver and set up overnight an entirely new set of election equipment for election day. Number two, we can reprogram all of the early voting equipment overnight after early voting ends. Or number three, we can leave all of our ballot styles loaded on the voting equipment and rely on our electronic poll book to control access to the ballot. The first two options require my staff, our elections technicians, to work overnight, converting those polling locations after already having worked a 14-hour day before, looking at a 14-hour day coming up, putting them up in a position of potentially having to work almost 40 consecutive hours. The third option eliminates overnight conversion, but it introduces additional risk. Because every ballot style would remain available on the voting equipment, poll workers would have the ability to manually issue the wrong precinct ballot if a barcode scanner fails or if they bypass our normal process. This is not a failure of the electronic poll book. It's simply recognizing that human error can occur despite extensive training. Rather than simply identify the problem, I would like to offer a solution. The most effective solution is to require countywide polling places statewide. Approximately 85% of Texas voters already use countywide voting places. Expanding that model to the remaining counties would eliminate the precinct-based operational challenge while continuing the legislature's efforts toward greater statewide consistency. My second issue is we are a non-joint primary county. Again, SB 2753 requires every early voting location to serve as an election day location. For counties like Denton that conduct separate Republican and Democratic primaries, this presents another challenge. In a non-joint primary, each polling location must accommodate two completely separate sets of voting equipment. Many of our early voting sites simply do not have enough physical space to do that. During this year's March primary, Denton County operated 55 early voting locations. Of those, assuming we implemented 2753 as it stands, 15 of those locations cannot physically accommodate equipment for both parties, and another 12 are questionable. As a result, we would have to eliminate many of our normal early voting sites. Again, I believe there's is a solution. Requiring a joint primary statewide would allow these elections to remain open, election locations to remain open, while also reducing costs for the state. I know my fellow election administrators have discussed and will continue to discuss other implementation concerns. However, these are the two most significant ones for Denton County. I sincerely want to see 2753 succeed. I believe this legislation has tremendous potential, and with a few targeted changes, it can accomplish its goals. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Members, any questions? Thank you, sir, very much
Thank
for
you.
being here. Chair calls Caleb Rowe, representing himself. Oh, he just stepped out. Timing's everything. All right, we'll come back to Caleb. Chair calls Jeff Brannick, representing the County Judges and Commissioners Association of Texas. Hello, sir.
Good morning.
I show you registered as Jeff Brannick, County Judge Jeff Brannick. You are representing the County Judges and Commissioners Association of Texas, and you're here testifying on the topic.
Correct, yes,
Thanks
sir.
for being here, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. May I provide the clerk with some handouts? Thank you. I would like, before I talk about the budget implications of SB 2753, to put some things in context. You are correct, Mr. Chairman, that counties are a creation of the state, and we are bound and determined to follow the laws that y'all pass up here and to pay for those as they are passed. There was no fiscal note for either the state or local governments for 2753. And obviously, as you are each acutely aware, over the last several sessions, we are working in an environment where there's considerable antipathy towards the property tax system, and more limitations being put on local government, and we are at a time when proposals are being made for the upcoming session to cap us at 0. We've done nothing in Jefferson County other than reduce our tax rate over the last 19 and a half years that I've been there. But we've done so because we have a very quickly expanding industrial tax base. It's provided us the opportunity to continue to meet expenses. So my county auditor and I looked at our expenses over the 15-year period from 2010 to 2025. During that time period, the Houston-Galveston Metropolitan Statistical Area numbers for the Consumer Price Index that are compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics were at 43.8% for that 15-year period. Our personnel costs for our non-represented employees at the county went up right in line, just slightly below the Consumer Price Index. But when I look at our other expenses at the county, jail food, jail medical, asphalt, cover stone, all those expenses, all up between 141 and 168%. Insurance costs up around 90%. And so we are operating in an environment, present company excluded, where we are doing our darndest to try to keep property taxes low, but met with ever-increasing demands by the state. We just finished our budget hearings, not completely concluded. I had to be here today, so I'm missing a budget hearing, but That's a good thing. Thank you. So we had about $467,000 in expenses to comply with mandates by the state over the last two sessions in this budget session. So when we look at the handouts that I gave the clerk, I've got two scenarios. And the reason I have two scenarios, and no disrespect whatsoever to the Secretary of State, because they have issued an advisory indicating that we're going to be able to reduce the number of, we no longer have early voting, but in Jefferson County, we have 11 early voting locations in past elections and 31 election day locations. They seem to indicate that we can combine some of those. And I have spoken to several lawyers, and I am an attorney, that have a disagreement with their interpretation. And obviously, it's much like the Secretary of State's advisories are much like an Attorney General opinion. They may keep an elected official, may provide an elected official with an affirmative defense to prosecution for official misconduct, but they are not the law until the court rules on it. And there are some disagreements as to whether or not we will be able to reduce the number. So if you look at the chart, if we are able to have our 11 early voting locations and our 31 election day locations, the increase in cost is about $50,856, not including a couple of additional employees that we're going to hire in the election administrator's office to take care of all the running around in support of the additional staff. And our average age of our election workers is about 77 years old. So if you go to, these extended days are going to implicate additional overtime not included in these numbers. There's about an additional $20,000 in additional overtime and part-time hours for just the county clerk and election administrators and sheriff for providing security because of the extended hours. When unlike Sherman County, we have very low voter turnout on the weekends in Jefferson County, which has a population of 256,000 people. So if you look on the right-hand side, if we are forced by the law and the eventual legal interpretation of it to have 31 early voting locations and 31 election day locations, then that number goes up to $497,636, which is a 335% increase over what we are presently spending. And so, I do not, if you ask Representative Swanson what my wish list is to not increase the cost at the local level, especially given that we've been in a very inflationary environment these last 6 years. And our costs have risen dramatically. And
Yeah.
And I do not mind, and I'm not pointing the finger at the state, at the House of Representatives or the Senate. I applaud Senator Hall's desire to ensure that the voting process is one done with integrity, and I'm certainly not against that, and I'm not critical of it. I'm not also not trying to be self-important and say that the county shouldn't have to do what the state says we should do. I understand full well we need to do
This
that.
this is helpful, because what you're saying is with your early voting sites, you just don't need as many workers, and then you're showing your election day, which is almost 3 times. And so with this piece of legislation, the amount of workers is going to increase. It may not be 31 or what have you. And so what this is telling me is, under this current bill, the way it's written, because you would have to staff hire and using your assumptions for a 2-week period, because you got 2 weeks of early voting on election day, you're essentially having a $500,000 increase.
Yes, sir.
And I
That's
think
exactly
what
it.
you also said is, the reality is, you have days where your voter turnout, it almost doesn't make sense to staff the day. So, maybe there's this dialogue that says in the context of this legislation, we look at the length of early voting. And so that if there's a scenario where we reduce the number of early voting, number of days of, I say early voting, the concept, that concept goes away. But if we reduce the number of days for voting, that could provide you quite a bit of relief, where at the same time, it sounds like, quite frankly, given the volume of voters that you have, it doesn't make sense to have the amount of days to begin with. So is that like a
No,
good
and
summary?
yeah, you're absolutely
Okay.
correct, Mr. Chairman, and I am also concerned, as is my county clerk EA, that we're going to be able to staff it. We have difficulty staffing it currently, and that's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This is a helpful analysis. I had not seen something like this before. This is very helpful.
Well, thank you
Judge,
so
I
very much
appreciate
for
it.
the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it.
Members, Ms. Swanson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a question about something you said. You seem to indicate that maybe it was somebody's interpretation of the law. You might have to start having 31 early locations. Okay, you said you have how many? 11 early voting locations. You go to 31 on election day. And you said if we had to go to 31 early voting, why would you have to go to 31? I don't understand
Well,
that.
I have read because number one, early voting doesn't exist anymore. And so there's some concern amongst the legal community that perhaps we're going to have to do the same thing during the first 12 days that we do on election day. And
Maybe we'll get
and
Ms.
there is an
Atkins
election
to-
advisory out on this.
By
But
whom? By
I'm
SOS?
concerned about how it will eventually be interpreted by the courts if someone challenges it. And I'm certain that my colleague over here who spoke earlier is a much better expert than me on the issue. But that is a concern for me
Okay,
right
so
now.
we need to clarify that it's okay to have more on the final day than we do on the
Yeah.
other days.
And they do have provisions in the law, in 2753 for consolidating precincts. I do not, as of yet, have information as to how that's going to play out in Jefferson County based on the numbers that are provided in the law for, under 5,000, over 10,000, under 1,000. Because we do have several precincts, and that's another concern with voting. We're required to have so many by the Secretary of State, and some of them are voting locations where we may have 28 during a 2-week period, and they're within a mile and a half of another voting location, and it just seems senseless for us to keep those open, given the amount of manpower and cost of doing so.
But do
Okay,
you-
so
oh,
we
I'm
just
sorry,
need
go
to
ahead.
look and see about the requirement between, it's still, my understanding would be, it's still called Election Day, that final day.
Yes.
So we need to look at that, whether there's any clarification needed or whether somebody's just incorrect in interpreting that it might cause you to have to do all that and all the other days that I'll still call early voting.
Yeah.
Okay?
And obviously, I think the attorneys for the EAs would probably be in the best position to analyze it, but I have come across some disagreement between attorneys over that issue, so I'm just raising that. I hope that I'm wrong.
Why don't you get that to us, and where it actually says, we interpret section 1, 2, 3, what exactly are they looking at when they disagree? And so we talk to Secretary of State, we figure out if we need to clarify something. And
Happy to do that. I'll
as
speak
far as
to,
making it where there's no more cost for the counties, and it sounds like the only way that could be done would be to just retract the bill. So I don't think we can grant you that, but maybe we can help in some ways.
Thank you so very
Okay,
much.
well, thank you so much.
Judge, that was really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you
Thank you
having
for being here. Where'd you go, Caleb? We called you earlier.
I got nervous.
Oh, you have a reason to be nervous. Chair calls Caleb Bro representing himself, and I'm totally joking. We're happy you're here, and you're always welcome. I show you registered as Caleb Bro. You are representing yourself, and you're here to testify on the topic of implementation of SB 2753.
Yes,
Is that-
sir. Yes, sir.
And I'm not supposed to say this, but you're my favorite
Oh,
election administrator.
I hope I'm a couple of folks' favorite on this.
Yeah,
this
you got a lot of
committee.
friends on this committee.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's an
You
honor to
may
be here. Representative Shaheen, Chair Shaheen, Vice Chair Busey, members of this committee, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and address some concerns. Just give a little background. I'm, how does the saying go? A first-time caller, long-time listener to this committee. So it's an honor to be here today. I actually have been part of elections in Texas going back to 2006. It's real funny. I reconnected with an old county judge today, Judge Brannick. I started off my career in elections in Jefferson County, Texas, from 2006, and then moved to the private side. And before Bruce Sherbert, the well-known EA here in Texas, retired, he pulled me back into the public sector. So thankful to be here. I think it's important for me to establish just some context before I get into how this bill affects us. But I want to build some context of what you're dealing with when we're talking about Collin County. So if I could start there, we have 780,000 plus registered voters, a population of 1.3 to 1.4 million residents of Collin County. We have made up of 273 precincts, and thankful for some legislation that was passed, Senate Bill 985, we are able to combine down and reduce the number of polling locations required. So super thankful for that. So during early voting, we have 42 early voting locations. And using Senate Bill 985, we've been able to reduce down to 90 election day polling locations. So that's kind of the makeup of Collin County. I know there's some great discussion yesterday. I hate that I wasn't a part of yesterday's discussion testimony. We are an offline county, so we're using that third-party vendor to manage our voter registration data. We recently, in the past year, implemented a hand-marked paper ballot with a ballot-on-demand system. So we are still machine tabulated, not to be confused with hand-counted. Machine tabulated, we still use ballot marking devices from a certified election vendor within the state for ADA purposes within our polling locations. And I do all of this with a full-time staff of 19 people when you include myself. So that's just a little context of Collin County and what we deal with there, just so you have a reference, because now I'm going to share with you what I view as some concerns. We are, again, a countywide vote center county, so our voters can vote at any of these polling locations across Collin County in the early voting period or on election day. So when I look at the challenges, and I'm not going to belabor a lot of these points. I think my colleagues did a great job of laying out some of these points. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time kind of belaboring this, but we definitely see the poll worker recruitment and retention being an issue for us. I don't know if some of you have served as election judges or poll workers, but a lot of those, when we talk about relinquishing responsibility in a polling location, you got a lot of people who are not going to give up that responsibility. If they've been serving through the early voting period, it's going to be hard to pry some of that data, some of those keys from their hands to relinquish it to someone who's coming in behind them. We're very fortunate in Collin County. We have a great ballot board, a phenomenal ballot board made up of representatives of both parties who audit our day-to-day transactions. They do that on a daily basis. So throughout the early voting period, we can see when there's discrepancies. Our poll workers during early voting, the lead deputy early voting clerks, do a great job of maintaining balance and accuracy within those polling places. Finding and keeping polling locations, I think, again, my colleagues have laid out some great ideas or some challenges that maintaining or reestablishing polling locations in and around counties like churches, and just some of those extended hours may make that a little more difficult for us. I do see some minor costs associated with the delivery and setup of election day equipment to our additional election day polling locations. Currently, being a countywide county, we have some great, I inherited some great mechanisms and processes to go ahead and deliver that equipment, and we have county staff go back and do setup. We also have field technicians or election techs that we deploy in and around the county that are servicing that equipment at the time voting is going on. Those folks are also used to do this election day equipment setup. So I will have a team of people or a couple of teams that I'm going to have to replace. So it's some minor adjustments with staff, but we really do have some great mechanisms in place already to assist this process along. And then finally, I think my biggest concern, if I had to say rank these challenges, this challenge of the delayed results reporting, I think, is probably our biggest. I have not heard from Representative Shaheen or Representative Plessa about when are my results going to be posted, but I have heard from others locally that are very interested in election results. I can tell you that about 60% of our results, traditionally, and now it varies from election to election, but about 60% of our results come from early voting in person. Anywhere between 5% to, I think you can throw out that 2020 election's a bit of an anomaly. We saw a higher number of mail ballots, but anywhere from 5 to 10% of our total ballots cast come from mail. From the mail ballot process. So occasionally we do see a shift where it moves closer to 50-50, early voting versus election day in person, where the total ballots cast are a mix of 50-50. But traditionally in Collin County, a majority of our ballots come from that early voting period. I can tell you, having worked for the vendor, I am a collector of a lot of data, and I have some data that I'd like to share with you, maybe offline or sometime later with some of your comments yesterday about hand-marked ballots. But we have noticed that when you use a precinct tabulator in a vote center that is scanning ballots, it takes longer. The more ballots a scanner has in it, it takes longer to close and compile that scanner. Those scanners are compiling scanned ballot images, compiling data. So I have some polling locations that is going to hold 60% of our ballots cast, in that area, and it's going to take a while. It adds additional time to close the equipment that's in those polling locations. So that will further delay my results from some of our higher turnout polling locations. And just for the record, you can open up as many Election Day polling locations as you want, but I've noticed our voters are creatures of habit. They're going to go to what they're used to, what they're used to seeing. They're going to vote at polling locations they're used to seeing that are open during that early voting period. We literally have a polling location. It's one of our highest turnout polling locations in Collin County. I have not thrown a baseball in a long time, but I think I could literally throw a baseball across the street and hit a polling location just next door, but people are going to wait in line to vote at this one location on Election Day. So just some thoughts. Again, didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I think in the end, I hope from my testimony, you can, I think the takeaway is I'm different than Denton County. I see fewer challenges, though the challenges don't exist or do exist, and I don't want to walk away saying that I don't have challenges, but I think being a countywide county of our size, a countywide vote center county, I think the implementation of this bill comes with fewer challenges than someone like Frank and Denton County, and that going from that anyone can vote anywhere to you have to go to your specific precinct on Election Day. Just a little bit of a takeaway as we've kind of huddled up and talked about this. I want to thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony today. I love Representative Busey's charge earlier, just that we are committed. I want you to know that me and my colleagues are committed to making this work, and to know that we have support and that we're willing to work hand in hand. I just want you to know how much that means to us and my colleagues across the state. So thank you for your time today. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Yeah, I think the feedback on countywide versus precinct level is, we hear you loud and clear. That's a significant issue. How many? Ms. Plessy, you can have
Thank
ask
you,
as
Chairman.
many as you want.
And Caleb, you are doing such a great job. We're so fortunate to have you up in Collin County. I just have a couple of questions on the election night results, because I know our county, I mean, our people are engaged and they are refreshing that button. So have we thought about how we're going to start educating, not just campaigns, right? Obviously, we know about it, but the people, because the people are the ones that are going to be looking at this information. And what I don't want is that to be mistaken for problems, because as you know, we are running some of the most efficient, safest elections in Collin County. So can you talk us through how maybe y'all are thinking about educating the voters on election night reporting?
Yeah, and Representative Plessy, I can tell you that we've been a little hesitant, to be completely honest with you, just because I don't know that up until recently that we had a really clear picture of the implementation or the rollout of this bill. But it's going to take all of us. I've already started talking to our local media. We're very fortunate to be in a high market media market there in the Metroplex, and so I think just the relationships that we've built with reporters. I look towards the Secretary of State and their educational tools, being able to share some of those things on our website, and just I think the charge of every election official across the state, just anytime we get an opportunity to talk about this bill and the implementation of this bill, any opportunity we get, we should address. This should probably be one of our high priority things, that just because you're not seeing a complete release of 60% of our ballots cast at 7 p.m., that does not mean that there's an issue.
Yeah, that's kind of one of my big concerns too, as I talk to, our precinct chairs and our volunteers and stuff, is educating them, not just on the fact that we're voting on paper ballots now, but also to kind of be a little bit patient on election night. The other thing that I'm a little concerned about, as Representative Valerie Swanson brought up, is that, we did not appropriate any money to this bill. So my concern is, has Collin County identified any new cost associated with the implementation of this bill?
Yeah, so we did attend the Secretary of State workshop that they put on. Super thankful for that. We got the worksheet, and to be completely honest with you, I finally decided to take a week of vacation the week following that workshop. So we've not completely worked through that complete workbook, but just honestly, I really believe that the processes we have in place, and being a countywide vote center county, we have a lot of the mechanisms in place already to kind of absorb some of those costs. Now, again, I think there's going to be some additional requirements for hiring temporary help. I think looking at hardware diagnostics when we prepare equipment to go out, we'll maybe need to throw some more resources at that. But I have not identified any major cost as we currently speak today.
That's fantastic. And then I guess my last question is, as we fully implement this bill going into, our next election cycles, what would you say would be the measure of success for this bill? Would it be turnout, wait time, staffing? How do we measure success of Senate Bill 2753?
I think when you look at, after we finish the election, we roll out the bill fully implemented, that we can look back and say that, and I learned this from my predecessor, that if none of us are above the fold, if no 254 counties across the state are above the fold, leading up to on a newspaper, for those of you who still get the physical copy of the newspaper, and then I think just that we can look back and say, well done. But at the same time, I think we're going to do our best, take our best shot to implement this across the state. but we have to constantly be open to learn, not from mistakes, but be open to tweaks. And our group does this really well, is we look at one another and look at best practices. And I think when we all get together and say, hey, this worked well for me, I'm a county of this size, I think coming out of that we did it well, no one is above the fold, but hey, we also, through this process, we learned this. I think that would be a great measure of our success here in Texas.
Thank you so much for your time, Caleb, and for driving up here. It was great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. It was helpful. Chair calls David Stein with TRCCA. Hello again, sir. I show you registered as David Stein. You are here representing TRCCA, and you are neutral on the topic.
Yes, sir.
All
Here
right.
to talk about the topic. So
You
thank
may
you again
proceed.
for the time to be here. Thank all of you for taking time to listen to our testimony. So a lot of what you've heard, I'd written down already. So a lot of the same concerns, same things from our standpoint on the county chairs. I applaud the decision about putting this off. I never in my wildest dreams thought this would be implemented this quick. When I first saw the bill at the election law seminar in last year, I knew it was going to take time. I applaud the decision. Let's start right, not just start fast. So that's great. Cost people have talked about already. We're struggling in areas of election worker pay. I think that's something we're just going to have to look at. It's harder and harder to recruit a lot of the election workers, which, by the way, is the charge of the county chairs in the primary, which is a point I'll bring up just shortly. You've got a huge issue with the communication. There's going to be mass voter confusion with this, and so we have to get out in front of it as fast as we can, as hard as we can, and as often as we can to make sure that the voters are at least as educated as possible. We enjoy in Smith County, we have a great EA, work with them the last 3 primaries. So it's a good working relationship there. There's a lot of turnovers we talked about a little bit yesterday in our area. We have 6 early voting locations currently and 33 election days. So we're one of those mid-market type counties. But the recruiting of the workers, the tiredness that they're going to have, the age of them is a concern. Also in the workers, one of the disadvantages in some rural counties and probably in urban as well is the makeup of the demographics. So we have a 3-to-1 Republican versus Democrat voter base, which makes it hard in attracting workers. And so if the minority party in that area has less population, there's less people to pull from, and it makes it harder for staffing purposes. So the more workers that we need, the more costs that are going to be, the more difficult that there's going to be. So the last point I just want to make, and it's something that we discussed yesterday. So I heard about the steering committee. I was glad to hear about some of the work that they've been doing. Last year at this time during the election law seminar, the steering committee was introduced. And I'll warn you now, it's a gripe coming up, is that I went to the mic and I said, I think it would be a great idea to have county chairs involved in this process from both parties. We need to have those voices. Since we are the filing authority, we are the election authority in the primary, we should have some voice in that, especially when we're the ones that are going to have to carry it out boots on the ground. We'd be happy to help. We'd love in any way to be part of the steering committee. Hadn't heard anything. I heard the results this morning. I'm glad to see that they're meeting. But I texted out a number of my colleagues, and I had texted Jennifer Hall, who's here with us today from Texas GOP. Are you guys involved in this at all? Are you involved in any of the steering committee? No. Chris Coons from Bexar County, San Antonio. Nope, but happy to help. Monty Montañez, the county chair in Dallas. Good morning. No, I've heard nothing about this. Greg Barnes, Fort Bend County. No. Hadn't been asked, hadn't heard anything about it. Tim Davis, Tarrant County. I mean, the list is large, and we're ready to help. We're ready to be here, part of the solution. This is going to be a massive undertaking and massive changes, and with us being the boots on the ground, working with the EAs to carry this out, in particular recruiting the volunteers. We'd love to be able to help to avoid pitfalls, to be as much of an asset as we can. So I'm sure, Mr. Busey and Ms. Plessa, members of the Democrat Party would also want to be involved in this process, because if we get this wrong, we're all in rough shape. There's going to be accountability all the way through for this, and it is vitally important, if we get it right, and if we can't get it right, to have the courage to stand up and put the brakes on and say, look, we need more time.
Thank you, sir, very much. Members, any questions? Ms. Plessa?
I just have a correction.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Democratic Party.
What did I say? I'm sorry.
You said the Democrat.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Just
Okay.
wanted to make a correction.
Okay. Duly noted. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you made about the party's involvement, and I think that those comments were made before, and I think that makes sense. Do you see any challenges or issues with the concept of countywide versus precinct level? Like, do you think if there's a move to go away from precinct level to countywide, is that going to cause a lot of heartburn, you think? Or do you have a feel for that, or do you want to come back on that one? Or?
No, I can comment, sure.
Yeah.
So in Smith County, we're countywide already. So
Okay.
we've been doing it for a while, and people love it.
Okay.
They're used to it. There are no issues with that. There's a concept out there that precinct-based, we all know our neighbors. And, maybe in our smaller population counties, that is so. There's 150 counties in Texas that are population 25,000 or less. But when you start getting into the mid-markets and the larger markets, it's harder and harder to recognize everybody that comes in to vote. But if we were to change back to precinct-based in Smith County, that would cause a huge upheaval, massive voter confusion. People are used to being able to vote in different places. I can be driving in a place of town and, shoot, I haven't voted yet. It's right across the street. Let me go. And so for that, that is convenient. So I've heard from when this came up, I think it was in the 2023 session, that there was a move to do this, and I was asked to support it, and I couldn't because I didn't know how everybody felt about it from a county standpoint. The larger counties express some advantages of precinct-based voting. The smaller counties seem to be more favorable towards the county-wide. Maybe there's a way to do a study anecdotally or study to find out specifically population by population where those areas are. But the mid-market counties like Smith and Tyler like the county-wide, and we're
Okay.
able to do what we need to do.
All right. My impression was backwards, so, okay. Interesting. All right. All right, well, thank you
Yep.
very much.
Thank you for your time.
Very helpful. Chair calls Bill Sargent, representing yourself. It's a long drive from Galveston.
Yes, sir. I gotta boot my computer for the testimony. Hold on a second here.
So I show you registered as Bill Sargent, and you are representing yourself, and you are here to testify on the topic. Am I accurate?
That's correct.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for making the drive.
Give me a quick second for I gotta get
All
my
right.
computer up. But in the meantime, while I'm getting my computer running, I want to give a shout out to Laura Rogers. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here. I don't know if you know it, but on May 29th of 2024, I died here at the state capitol. I was dead for 30 to 40 minutes. And she, God placed her just in front of the hearing room at the Senate. And I don't know if you know it, but she was a paramedic for 20 years.
I didn't know she was the one that did the resuscitation.
And she came and she kept me alive.
Wow.
I
I
mean,
didn't know she was the one.
only 1% of the people who have that happen actually keep their cognitive ability and make it. So it's
Well,
because
God
of her
bless
that I'm
you
here.
and her.
So, anyway, it's up, I'm ready to go.
You've got our attention.
Okay. I've testified numerous times in support of the concept of one voting period. The devil's in the details. I draw attention to Section 16 of SB 2753, which is subsection 85.005 of the Election Code. Based on the primary, 2026 primary, 6,600 voters could have been disenfranchised by the language of this provision that has to do with Sunday voting. It will require us to keep the polls open for 9 hours, not just one Sunday, but 2 Sundays. Notoriously, Sundays for us in Galveston County have been very low turnout. When I handed out, there's a chart that gives you the statistics. About 2.5% of the voting that takes place on Sunday, I'm sorry, of the early voting turnout, 2.5% is on Sunday. Very, very low turnout. Most of our church locations will probably stop using us, allowing us to use their location, because of 9 hours required. It affects conflicts with their ability to have church and worship services, and so we will probably lose them. That's about 17% of the total polling places we have in Galveston County. And that's not just losing them for Sunday, that's for losing them for the entire voting period, which is it's a major problem for us. Well over half of the votes counted on Galveston Island itself. That's about 3,600, and they get in the last primary. Are people who voted at churches, half of them. So with those gone, where are these people going to go to? One of the people who works at Moody Methodist told me, said, you know, when they don't use us for entity elections, we have people coming up to say they want to vote, and they find out it's not a voting location. So they say, oh well, I got to get back to work. I don't have time. I forgot I just won't vote. That's a problem. But there is a solution. The next legislative session, you can change 85.005 of the Election Code to limit Sunday voting to a minimum of 4 hours and a maximum of 6. That increases the total amount of Sunday voting we currently have, which is now 6 hours on one Sunday. But it allows for the continuing Sunday voting, but it does not require 9 hours. One of our election judges told me that if we go to 9 hours on Sunday voting, that she's probably going to retire. She's probably the best judge we have in the entire county. Her reaction was, it's like watching paint dry. There are not that many people coming out. So you can fix this problem, and I encourage you to do so. I'm only hitting one item. There are other items I could talk about, because of the limit of time, I just wanted to have one item I want to talk to. So that's my testimony. I'm confident you guys can fix this.
I think it's going to take us and quite a few other parties, but yes, it will be addressed. And I think I think the Sunday, you bring up the Sunday hours. I think that was a miss that we certainly will correct. Ms. Swanson.
Yes. Tell us about ballot security on Election Day in Galveston County.
Well, as you've been talking about this with our witnesses, right now, if you do early voting, the deputy comes and opens up the ballot box, verifies there's no ballots in the ballot box, and closes it up and locks it up, and then we vote for early voting. At the end of early voting, we open up that ballot box again, takes a deputy and the judge to do it, and then we look at it, zip up the box with all the ballots in it, and we put one lock on it with one seal with 2 locks on it, the deputies and the judges. Then come Election Day, 4 days later, we do the exact same thing. Just happens to be a different ballot box which had nothing in it in the beginning. So it's the exact same process. So I see no reason why you could not have if you have one period, or you could have the same thing. You at early voting locations which would then also be used for election day, then you would have a situation where you'd lock, you'd verify there's no votes in the ballot box, and you go ahead and you'd lock up the box, because as a judge, I can't get into it and until the deputy is there. And then at the end of election day, you do the same process. And if you have a ballot that in a high volume location, then you have to replace that. You still can't get into that ballot box without the deputy. So it's the same process. I see no reason why it should be a problem.
Okay, and you had indicated you might have another issue or something.
Well,
Did we cover
Mr.
that?
Chairman, you've mentioned on several occasions that the idea of releasing results at 7 o'clock has gone away. I see that as a benefit, because we have in a number of locations in Galveston County where people are standing in line at the end of election day. They're in the polling place at 7 o'clock, but they're sitting there and they're on their cell phone. All right, I know you can't really control that, and they're on their cell phone and they're looking at what the results are. And then they say, "Oh, my candidate won. I don't need to vote." Or, "My candidate lost. I don't need to vote." I think that you should not allow election results to be announced until the last person has voted, because that way you're influencing what's happening. Now, as far as ballots by mail, when I was running elections in Galveston County, we would go ahead and we would put all of it onto a disk or flash drive. We'd have everything be scanned, it'd be reconciled, it'd be the central count would look at it if there were any questions that had to be dealt with, and that would all be on a disk. And then at 7 o'clock, we would then tabulate it. We wouldn't tabulate it until after 7, but it would already be done. But, again, the amount of early voting, the amount of ballots by mail versus the total number of votes probably wouldn't sway how a voter is going to vote. But that's the second issue.
But within a county, we already do that. Like, we
Right.
don't, if there are any polling locations that are still open because people were in line at 7, then the election official is not supposed to release any election results at all. Now,
But now, we've been told by the person who took my job and by Secretary of State's office that you are allowed to go ahead and release those results even if voters are still in a polling place if it's after 7. The code does
we'll
not.
have to check and see whether that, because in many times in Harris County over the years, I've seen them hold them back. Are they just doing that because that's the right thing to do? Or do we need to put that into code? And now certainly a voter could stand in line and look at statewide results or
Sure.
national results and go, "Hey, I don't need to vote." But we should at least have it where they don't, if any polling locations are open, they don't release any election information, results at all. So, yeah, there are a couple of questions I'd like to ask Christina Atkins at the end. That'd be one of them, Christina, and the other one.
That's a really
had to
good
do with
question,
that-
Christina.
The one guy's interpretation that he might have to have all the polling locations. So that 2 questions.
But I think it should be clarified in the code that no results are released until after the last person has voted.
If it's not already in code, we
Yeah,
need to do that, right? Okay.
It's not, it's my understanding.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, very
You're
much.
welcome. God bless you. Have a good day.
God bless you. Thank you for being here. Chair calls Bruce Campbell, representing himself. Well, he's here. You can ask him. Sir, I show you registered as Bruce Campbell. We're not sure if you're an actor or not, and you're representing yourself, and you're here testifying on the topic. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
true? All right.
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And there is an actor that has that name. He's younger than me, and I don't have his income. So I'd like to just take a minute to tell you just something about my background other than Representative Swanson, who knows me. I've worked in probably every election for the last 40 years. Most of that time early on I was an election judge in Harris County, and then I was an election judge in Fort Bend County when I lived there for a few years, and then my wife and I retired and got out of the big city and moved to Fredericksburg in Gillespie County in 2020, where I then served as the central count judge, and then I was the county judge for the last couple of terms. In that time, I've seen a lot, and I met Representative Shaheen at the county chair convention. He told me I needed to get up off my couch and come down here and speak to y'all, because I'm not somebody who usually comes to Austin and testifies. So I'm here. I did what you said, so I'm here today. And so I just jotted a few notes on this bill. It was my understanding early on that this bill that the 4 days were eliminated for an election integrity issue. And to me, that was a solution looking for a problem. I never saw a problem between the end of early voting. If you had a good chain of custody, there was no problem between the end of voting. And as Representative Swanson said, what I saw in those early years in Harris County is the weekend is when we as judges would go pick up our supplies from the county and get ready for the election on Tuesday. The elections are totally different in a big giant county than they are in the county I'm in now. We have in Gillespie County, we have 21,000 some odd voters. We have 13 precincts. In a typical election, we have early voting in one location, the election office. And when there's a nice room, we have that in. And then on election day, we're in 13 precincts scattered about the county. About half of our voters live in our only incorporated town, which is Fredericksburg, and about half of the voters live in rural area. And so about half the voters vote early and about half vote on election day. But it's not equal in every precinct. The precincts closest to town tend to vote a majority in early voting because they're close to the early voting location, whereas the rural precincts tend to vote mostly on election day because they don't want to drive to town. You know, you would think that driving is a problem in Houston, and it certainly was, but it's different. People just have a different mindset in a rural setting. They might say it's way across town. Well, our town's only 2 miles wide, so you would laugh at that in the big city, but to them it's all the way across town. So they're not going to drive in, so they're going to vote on election day. So that nice election office, which served as our location for early voting, then also serves as a location where all the judges pick up their supplies. And then on election day, people return, or the early voting ballot board will meet in that room. And then later, all the different judges bring their supplies back to that same room. But now that room will have to be a voting location the whole time. Since we just have that one location, and that early voting location is in Precinct 1 will then be voting in that location on Election Day because it has to be the same location. Or because the other choice would be have early voting at the Precinct 1 location, which is the Methodist Church. Well, it's not going to be available all of early voting. And so there's a quandary there that I don't know how the county's going to solve. And so the other thing is, when I was the county chair, you had to run the primaries, and I ran 2 primaries. And you have to set up your budget and figure out how much you're going to spend and get, become good at spreadsheets and stuff you didn't have to do when you're just an election judge. And so one of the things I had to do was order ballots. Now, this sounds like an easy issue, but so basically what I had to do was go back and look at the previous election of the same kind and look at every precinct and see how many people voted in each precinct and how many people voted early in each precinct. And I would have in my spreadsheet had each precinct that had how many mail-in ballots they had in that precinct, how many early voting voters, and how many election day voters. And then you take that percentage of people who voted and you apply that same percentage to how many registered voters are in that precinct today, and then you figure that's the number of people who are going to show up to vote, and you add 25% to that, and that's how many ballots you order. So those ballots go to that early voting location, and those ballots are used as early voting takes place, and then on the weekend in between, the leftover ballots are then packaged up to go out to the precincts. Well, if voting in early voting location goes all the way till Monday evening, you basically now have to double order your ballots because you have no idea ahead of time how many people in each precinct are going to vote early, because they might vote early one election, they might vote on election day, the next election. So you're going to have to be prepared for a large amount from whatever precinct, because precincts don't always have the same ballot. They have different commissioners on the ballot, they have different constables on the ballot, and so they have different ballots. And so you're going to have be ready for a large number of them to vote early, but you don't know how many of them are going to vote early, so you're going to have to order a large amount of ballots to have on election day, because there's no time to switch those ballots over, because people will have already picked up their election supplies before Monday night at 7 p.m. And so that's a cost factor for us. It's, we have 10,000 ballots. For Harris County, they have, 1 trillion ballots. I don't know what it is. It's a lot more than us, though, right? It's a lot more. And so that's an area that needs addressing. I don't know how you solve that problem. Again, our early voting ballot board would meet in that room. I don't know where they would meet, because there'll be an election going on there. So they're just going to have to go down to a hotel room or something. I don't know what takes place there. In a primary, the county pays for early voting. The party pays for election day. But the early voting location's suddenly going to switch from early voting to election day overnight. And I don't know how you account for the budget for all that. Somehow there's got to be a cutoff and a startup, because different people are paying for that location after Monday, because now it's election day and the party's paying for it. I don't know if that changes in this bill. I didn't go look at that. The Sunday issue. Voting anytime before 1 p.m. would be an issue. In fact, really voting on that weekend. The way we use early voting in our county, that's different than the big counties, is we tell our judges, each of you, of our election day judges, each of you need to go work a day of early voting and get your clerks to work some early voting, so that you all have experience right before you're going to work on election day. It's almost a good training for them to go work early voting. But you don't want them working the days right up to it, because it's going to be the same people. The same people who work during early voting are our election day workers. We don't have this big supply of other people out there. In fact, over 50% of our voters are over 65 years old. And so these aren't all young people doing this. And so it's, again, I heard somebody speak earlier about the way it looked, and it looked this way when I was in Harris County. My precinct, when I was precinct chair, I'd be voting at the elementary school, and the nearby precinct was across the street at the Baptist church, and the next precinct was 2 blocks down at another building, and we all had full staffs. And so countywide voting in that eliminated all that, having to duplicate all those staffs. We don't have that problem in our county. We've tried to make it, because voters do get confused, we want them to get used to voting at one location. And so we've tried not to move our locations, because they go back just out of habit. Whatever it was last time, that's where they're going to go next time. And so we're not going to combine any of our precincts, because you're not going to combine, none of them are close together. So we don't have the problem the big city had. And we want our 13 locations, because whenever we don't have that, for instance, when the school district has a school board election, they have one location, the election office. They don't have any other locations. So when I go back and analyze that election, you have a huge turnout of people who live close to that, and the people who live in the rural areas don't participate in the school board election because they're kind of disenfranchised. So anyway, that's why I want to keep our precinct-based voting out there. Anyway, I've kind of rambled on. That's kind of most of the areas I jotted down a few notes on, but I'm available if you want to ask a question of somebody who's done a lot of it.
Yeah, you've done quite a bit. Any questions, Ms. Swanson?
What's your wish list for legislative changes?
Well,
no more than 3 items.
I can just tell you, the system that we're using in Gillespie County, I am 100% in favor of. And you know, in our state convention, one of our legislative priorities called for votes to be counted by scanners at the precinct level, and that's what we do. We have in our major elections, you vote we have a ballot. It's the first time I ever voted this way is when I moved to Fredericksburg. But we actually have a ballot where you color in the rectangles next to the voter you want. I had never done that in all of my voting. And you go over, the voter goes over and puts that ballot in a scanner, and it's counted right there. There's no counting at the county later. That scanner counts it right there. And you know the results at the precinct because the election judge prints out the results. So even though you take the scanner down and those results are then compiled at the county level, you already know the totals of them. And then afterwards, we have to do the post-election hand count. And so we're even, in our case, we're a minimum 3 precincts have to be hand counted, 3 races in 3 precincts. And when we've done that, they've always matched exactly what the scanner said. And so, to me, if it's election integrity issue, if you're going to cheat, you have to cheat both on the scanner and you have to get those election hand counters to cheat the same way. Well, that's not ever going to happen, right? You have to cheat 2 different ways and it doesn't happen. So, the other thing that happened in this, I believe it was this bill that did it, is before we would, for the post-election hand count, you had, in our case, we had to do 3 precincts, 3 random precincts of 3 races. And so after it was over, we would take 3 precincts and we would go back and count the mail-in ballots, the early voting in person, and the election day in person. But now I believe that what this bill changed was because early voting is one location, that's now viewed as a precinct of its own, and we had to post-election hand count all of our early votes, all 4,000 of them, because there was only one location, not the fact that there were many precincts there. And so that took several days to do that, which we didn't have to do before, and that was in the primary, so I had to pay all those people that I wasn't having to pay before to do that extra counting.
So are you avoiding Ms. Swanson's question?
Did I? That was somebody, I'm saying, I don't want a lot of change.
Was that non-responsive?
No, so I said my wish list is don't fix what ain't broke.
All right.
So you feel like this bill was a solution in search of a problem?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I appreciate that. I had a lot of concerns about it. It's sure good to see you and Meg, and you know, we've forgiven you for deserting Harris County, but thank you for keeping up the good work elsewhere.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for being here. We miss you and would like for you to come up and hear from you. Chair calls Ms. Christina Atkins. You're Ms. Christina Atkins still?
Yes, sir.
And you're still at the Secretary of State's office?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
All right. And you're just testifying on the topic?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I think Ms. Swanson might have some questions for you. Can you turn your mic on?
Yes, Mr. Campbell brought up the problem about splitting the cost between parties and counties during the primary, and so that would be my third question.
Sure.
And did you get down what the first 2 were?
I believe so. I think
Okay.
the first question you had was regarding the testimony we heard from Jefferson County about, the gentleman from Jefferson County about our interpretation of the bill and the requirements for polling locations.
Exactly. Right.
So with respect to that issue, there is a distinction in the law between the polling locations during that early voting period and polling locations during Election Day. While we are creating a continuous period of voting under the law, and there are components to how that is reported and how we maintain records, while some components have changed, the law itself still has a distinction in what we call early voting and what we call Election Day. And the provisions that establish the locations that you need for early voting and the locations that you need for Election Day didn't change. And so it's 85062 in the election code gives our commissioners courts broad authority to determine the number of polling places that they have for the early voting period, so the days leading up to Election Day. There is a different methodology for Election Day outlined in two other provisions of the law for Election Day itself. It's 43001 and 43007. So the methodology for determining the number of places you need has not changed. It's different for everything prior to Election Day, and then Election Day has its own rules. There was a provision, 43.0015, that says that if you have an early voting location, it must also be a polling place on Election Day. That was one of the changes in the bill. And that may be where some of the confusion is coming from, but that is not saying all your Election Day locations have to be early voting locations. It's just saying if it was open for early voting, it stays open and becomes a polling place on Election Day. So I'm fairly confident in our office's interpretation and our reading of the law, because it's not really an interpretive leap. We're reading the law as it's written to come up with that determination.
Okay. Sounds like you can be more than fairly certain. It sounds
Yes,
like
ma'am.
you got it there.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you get down what was question number 2?
So the question number 2 was about the releasing of results.
Yes.
So there's a provision in the law, 127.1311 in the Texas Election Code, that says that when results come in, they have to be reported, immediately after 7 p.m. The results, you have to start releasing results. But it has a provision in there that says, subsection B, I believe it is, that says if voters are still in line voting, the election officials may withhold the release of results. So it's optional. It's a may.
Okay.
Some counties routinely withhold results if they hear that there are voters that are still in line. Some counties don't do that, but it's discretionary the way the law is written right now.
Okay. And do you think that's a problem? Should we change that, or do you think it works well the way it is?
I think that anytime we can have uniformity and consistency in what's happening from one county to another, I think that's probably something worth considering. I know that we had an election recently, I think it was in Bexar County, where Bexar County never used to withhold the release of results, but they have had a change in leadership there, and there were still people in line voting, and it was a contentious I think it was a contentious local issue. I want to say it was even maybe the November election last fall during, they had a bond measure for the Spurs Stadium. And there were a lot of people in line at some locations, and the county election official called me because it was her practice from other locations, other counties she'd worked at, to withhold results. And I think it caused a little bit of confusion there because she opted to withhold results, even though in the past they weren't. They never did that before. And so I think we do hear about that from time to time, where I think just having the discretion, in some situations I can see why that's good, but I think it also creates confusion when you see different counties doing different things.
So you're saying perhaps consider making it one way or the other?
It's probably worth a broader discussion and maybe talking to some more counties about that and some of those experiences. I mean, I can see a situation where, you may not know, it's Secretary of State's office where we do the election night reporting. We're on the phones calling counties starting at 7:01 to get them to prompt them to submit results to our office. And many of our counties are ready to go, ready to hit the button at 7 o'clock to start reporting their results to us, which would be mail ballots under the change in 2753. And they may not always be aware that there are locations that haven't quite wrapped up or have a few people in line. And it may be that they only have a handful of people in line, and it's nothing that's going to be impacted by the release at 7 p.m. So I can understand why maybe there's a need for a little bit of discretion there, but where we hear it being an issue is when there's long lines at polling locations.
Okay.
And they're concerned about the results coming out, and there's people that still have an hour left to go before they get to vote.
Right. That makes sense. And the third question was Bruce Campbell's question about, will this cause complications in splitting the cost between parties and the county in a primary?
So I don't think so. I don't think we foresee a difficulty in determining costs because there are things that the that the county pays for with early voting, but there are things that the state pays for as well. And there's a little bit of overlap there. Generally, programming costs for an election, we pay for all of that, even though that covers early voting and election day, because the programming that we're going to have to do anyway. The biggest discrepancy or the biggest difference is going to be with workers. We don't pay worker costs for early voting, whereas the counties have to assume a lot of those costs, but we do pay worker costs for election day. And so that's not going to change. So at this point, I don't foresee complications in determining costs. Now, will there be an impact to the primary fund? Potentially, but we don't have enough data to really know that yet. And I think that was the question about the fiscal note on the bill. I think at the time, we don't have enough information to know if this is going to result in increased costs across the state, or if counties are going to have cost savings that'll offset the costs that other counties may be experiencing. Some counties are going to have a cost savings from the implementation of this bill. Some are reporting higher costs. We don't know what that offset's going to be. So we don't really have a prediction, and that's why I think the fiscal note for the bill indicated it's primarily a local cost, and we don't have enough information to ultimately determine what that would be for the state.
Okay, thank you.
I think the only question I had was, whatever meetings are left from like a work group perspective, that y'all take a look at, broadening the participation. There was some
Absolutely.
discussion about that.
Absolutely, and that was always our intention.
Okay.
It's just when we first began discussions, we realized that it was going to be it was much more difficult on the educational front with our counties than we anticipated it being. And so we made a concerted effort to focus our education on the counties. I want to make it very clear, our political parties are a valuable part of this process, and they have an important role. But understanding that the counties do most of the work for all of the other elections, we wanted to really work hard to get them educated and make sure we answer their questions, because we see them as helping us with the educational efforts with our political parties and working with the political parties to understand county interests. And so
Makes
that has
perfect
always
sense.
been part of our intention to pull the political parties in. We just needed to get some baseline work done with our counties.
Makes total sense. Thank you. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to testify on the topic of integration of early and election day voting? If not, we will move on to our next charge, which is charge number 9, agency oversight, pursuant to the broad oversight responsibilities granted to the committee under Section 301.014 Government Code and the House Rules of Procedure. Monitor the agencies under the committee's jurisdiction, including for fraud, waste, and abuse where applicable. The jurisdiction of the Elections Committee includes the Office of the Secretary of State. With that, Chair calls back Ms. Christina Atkins. Ma'am, I still show you registered as Christina Atkins, and you're still with the Secretary of State's office.
Certainly hope
And,
so.
I would ask that you only testify on this item,
Yes, sir.
not in favor or against.
Yes, sir. Of
All right.
course.
Well, you may proceed.
Absolutely. So in
Do you
preparing,
feel like you've already gone through the evaluation, by the way? Or?
Always, every time I'm up here. But that's because I appreciate the great questions that our lawmakers are asking us. I think transparency and accountability is very important. So in preparation for today, in this specific charge, there were 2 issues that I was asked to bring up with the committee and make sure that we are providing some information to the committee on in an effort to be transparent and be accountable. The first was with respect to some funding that the Secretary of State's office received for threat monitoring. We did receive 2 allocations related to security issues as it pertains to elections. One allocation was with respect to specifically threat monitoring, or what we refer to as our darknet web monitoring program. So we did receive an allocation from the legislature for this. This is something that we have done before. I believe when we did this before a number of years back, we were using federal funds at the time to do this. But this has now become a more widely used it is now more widely used in the election community to engage in this type of monitoring activity. And so with the allocation, with the funding that we received, we went to DIR to utilize their managed security services contract. And DIR was able to provide a vendor to us that we have a subscription with now. Our subscription with this company began in April. It's with their contracted vendor, SAIC. This service that we get from them includes a dedicated darknet analyst, essentially, that monitors and looks at activity on the internet, looks at different forums, looks at the dark web. They provide intelligence information to us and help with remediation efforts if necessary. While there's no guarantee that we can ever prevent some kind of cyber event from occurring, the goal of this engagement is to provide the Secretary of State's office with alerts about the threats that target the Secretary of State's office, some of our vendors that we work with, and of course, our county election officials as well. We'd like to try to get alerted to something before an event happens so that we can take the necessary steps to protect our office, to protect our resources, and to protect our counties. So with this monitoring, they're monitoring our website, they're monitoring even VIPs within our office, any assets that we have. The monitoring also, as I indicated before, includes monitoring of our county election officials. We did reach out to all of our county election officials to notify them that we were engaging with this program, and we asked for specific contacts so that if we were really alerted to something impacting a county, we would know who the proper point of contact would be in the county to bring the event to their attention. And this has been very successful. We have a dashboard where we can monitor activity. We get regular briefings from this vendor and regular communications about anything that they find that could be concerning to us. We have thus far notified counties of some things that we have become aware of and passed that along to them. And that's, I think, been proof as to why this is successful, because our counties who all have logins to our statewide system, that have their own vendor relationships, that provide the local election services, to all of the jurisdictions in their counties, need to be protected in addition to the state. And if we can help by bringing information to their attention that makes them more safe and secure, then we're helping do our job as a state too. And it's been, thus far, I think, a successful program. We have been able to get the briefings, provide some information to counties that have been helpful. And we're going to continue to do so and continue to monitor the activity, of course, leading up to this big election.
So they're not doing any of your firewall security or anything like that? This is more of, I guess, intelligence
Yes,
gathering?
it's monitoring.
Okay.
They're not providing those services. We have different vendors that do that. Right. But this is an overall monitoring of our situation, our posture, and identifying potential vulnerabilities, kind of what's out there and what the chatter is out there.
Do they do penetration testing, or is that your current firewall vendor that does
I'd have to double check on who has performed that for us, but we have engaged in those activities as well. I'm just not sure who the vendor would be for that. I'd have to
Ms.
check
Swanson?
Yes, you're not really going to leave us wondering what interesting, hot things that they found and you reported. Give us some facts.
I'm happy to meet with you, I think, outside of this hearing to discuss some of those issues. But from a security perspective, there are a lot of things that I can't discuss in this context for security reasons. But if there's any members of the committee that would like to meet privately, I'd be happy to share some more details on some of those items.
I would encourage the members to do that. Those would be, I think you would find those very helpful, and there's probably some discussion that we don't want the evildoers to listen in on. So.
Exactly. I will also add that we did receive some additional funding from the legislature to conduct another round of election security assessments. Back in 2019 and 2020, we used federal funding that we received from the Help America Vote Act, some additional grant funding that had come in from the federal government to pay for security assessments for all 254 of our counties. The legislature did allocate some additional funding so that we could begin another round of assessments. And so we're going to be starting that program soon. We're going to be talking to our counties about it at our upcoming election law seminar, and we'll begin that process of signing counties up to do another round of security assessments. And so this is where that county's physical and cyber security and other security components to what they do will be assessed, and they'll be given a report identifying areas of where they're doing well and areas where they could use maybe some additional support or remediation.
Awesome. Next topic?
The
Audits.
next topic that I had on my list was with respect to administrative oversight in Valverde County. So administrative oversight, this is a newer thing that our office has engaged in. Since 2021, our office, the Secretary of State's office, has been charged with administering audits for election administration and voter registration in randomly selected counties. This was a provision that was added to Senate Bill 1 in 2021, creating this county election audit program. Since that time, our office has completed 12 different county audits. What we do as part of these audits is we go into a county and we review all of their elections that they have had in the preceding 2 years. And we review kind of all aspects of the election process, starting with voter registration all the way to their post-election hand counts and their post-election audits. We were, in 2023, as part of Senate Bill 1933, the Secretary of State's office was given some additional authority to potentially place an audited county under administrative oversight if we identify a reoccurring pattern of problems related to election administration or voter registration. And to date, we have only taken this action with one county. In July of 2025...
Was that Williamson County?
No, sir, it was not.
Oh, okay, because it's got to be random.
So the counties are randomly selected. We do a drawing, a public drawing, to select the counties that are audited. And then when we audit those counties, if we find a problem, a reoccurring pattern of problems in certain aspects
Right.
of election administration, voter registration, we can place them under oversight.
Okay, and that's because that's probably what the statute had in
Yes,
the
sir, that's
rulemaking.
correct.
And so, I just kind of wonder, considering what happened in the Williamson County primary, we need to be able to have an entity look into those things that has the authority to do so. And so, thank you very much. Didn't mean to hijack your...
No, it's quite
Thank
all
you.
right, sir, quite all right. I'm happy to take any questions you have. So I will say that, we've now conducted these 12 audits. In July of 2025, we released preliminary findings about Valverde County. And the reason why we released those preliminary findings is because as we audited that county, and this is specific to their voter registration responsibilities, and this would be in Valverde County, it's the tax assessor collector's office. It's a split county. County clerk does elections, tax assessor collector does voter registration. Dating back to 2023 and prior to Valverde being audited, we have had to work with Valverde County on some voter registration issues. We have actually gone out to Valverde County multiple times to provide on-site training and assistance to the tax assessor collector's office to address some very critical issues that we identified in their voter registration process. Specifically, the tax assessor collector was not maintaining jurisdictional boundary lines in their voter registration system, which resulted in the inability to generate accurate voter registration lists. There would be territory lines changing, city lines might change for various reasons, but that information was not being reflected, and it was impacting accurate voter rolls. Additionally, the county failed to address other critical issues that we had identified in the voter registration process that resulted in voters receiving incorrect ballots, voter registrations being duplicated, and the improper cancellation of voters that were on suspense. Our laws tell us how we need to do these things. They give us pretty straightforward procedures on how we handle provisional voting, statements of residence, all these other ways that update voter registrations. And we were not seeing that the laws were being complied with as intended. So in placing Valverde County under administrative oversight, this has allowed our office to continue to monitor Valverde County's voter registration process and provide much-needed assistance in developing internal county policies. In fact, right now we are working with Valverde County on a policy manual regarding voter registration. The tax assessor has created something in their attempt to try to address some of these deficiencies, and we're working with them to make it more comprehensive and build it out. I want to acknowledge that Valverde County has been a very willing participant and partner in this. They have been very forthcoming with us with information in helping us identify the deficiencies, helping us identify the areas where they need some additional assistance, and they have been very receptive to the feedback that we've been providing to them. They have had some challenges. There has been some turnover in that office. We actually, as recently here as I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were doing some additional training with that office because they had more turnover and didn't have individuals that were trained on voter registration law and policy and procedure. And so there have been some challenges that the county has faced that have made it very difficult for them to comply with the requirements under the law with respect to voter registration. And so we do acknowledge that and want to be very clear that there have been some things that have made it difficult for them. But I think having the ability to continuously work with them and continuously monitor is going to help Val Verde County voters. It's going to help ensure that the county establishes the right policies and procedures so that should there be unexpected turnover or unexpected challenges in the county, they've got a plan to make sure they can continue doing what they're statutorily required to do so that it doesn't impact our elections. It doesn't impact the accuracy of a voter list. It doesn't impact the voting experience for the voters in that community. And I do commend them for being such a willing partner and working so hard with our office to try to make improvements in that area. I think it's really, one last thing I want to say on that. I think it's really important to note that administrative oversight is not a state takeover of election responsibilities or voter registration responsibilities. The state is not performing the duties that are under law are provided to the tax assessor collector or the county clerk. And in fact, the bill doesn't give us the authority to do that. The legislation or the provisions in law don't give us the authority to take over. What this does, though, is it gives us the ability to help identify issues and help remediate them. The goal of administrative oversight is remediation, to fix the issues that we find. It's not punitive. And so I think that's an important distinction. We hear a lot of that narrative about state takeovers, but that is not what this is. That is not what the law does. It's our intention to always use this process, if it's engaged, in a way to help our counties be better at what they're doing to protect the voters in their community.
That was very helpful. Very helpful
Thank you.
indeed. All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chair calls Debbie Lindstrom, representing Citizens Defending Freedom, and yourself. Hello, ma'am. Show you registered as Debbie Lindstrom. You are here representing Citizens Defending Freedom and yourself, and you're testifying on the topic.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
Hey. Okay, I'm Debbie Lindstrom with Citizens Defending Freedom. I want to raise 3 opportunities to strengthen oversight of our elections. First, transparency. 4 months ago, I filed a complaint with the Secretary of State showing discrepancies in the March primary and received a reference number, but have yet to receive a response. My review of that primary documented election day voter counts far below what the county certified totals were, and the same pattern was found in the runoff. This is an opportunity for further investigation and to build more transparency into the complaint process. A simple solution would be an online monthly report posted on the Secretary of State's website that would list the complaint, the county, the issue, and the resolution. Second, advisories. The Secretary of State maintains it no longer issues waivers, but its advisories function the same way. One example, Advisory 2025-17, states that voter rosters need only include the name, the VUID, and precinct number, omitting the date of voting required by Section 87. By setting a standard below what the statute requires, the Secretary of State is functioning as if it can rewrite the law through an advisory, violating the separation of powers provision in the Constitution. Third, accountability. We already have a good law on the books entitled Unlawful Altering of Election Procedures, Section 276.019. This next session provides a great opportunity to add incremental civil penalties to anyone from local election administrators to the Secretary of State who violates election law. Ms. Adkins testified yesterday that the Secretary of State has no enforcement authority beyond referring criminal complaints to the Attorney General. A penalty structure similar to what was proposed in SB 618 last session would help to close that gap. I ask this committee to act next session to provide more transparency and accountability because a law without a penalty is just a suggestion. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions? Which county was there the discrepancy?
It was across the state.
Oh, one specific county was.
It was multiple counties across the state. So I'll give you one example. In the primary, there was a county, it was Nueces County. Nueces County showed a 0 for election day on the Secretary of State's website.
Yeah, I think we talked about that.
However, once it was pointed, and this was after the canvass had happened, after it was, they were supposed to have 8,091 voters on election day, according to the county records. After, I looked yesterday,
Yeah, I
and
think
it's
we
still at 16,170, which is double what they should have had. And when you look at the records, everybody is listed twice. So it's, I don't know how they were counted. I'm not saying that this is fraud. I'm not saying that someone did anything wrong, but there's something wrong between the county and the state's records that needs to be investigated.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on the topic of Secretary of State oversight? Come on, nobody? All right, members, that concludes today's agenda. Is there any further business for the committee to address? If not, the chair moves to adjourn. Is there objection? Hearing none, the House Committee on Elections stands adjourned, subject to the call of the chair. Good job, everybody.